I want to make this so practical for people.
Yes.
I want people to get your books for sure, to get all the science and all the tips. But I really want some kind of, maybe we could go through some common foods, for example, or common things that people do just to explain blood sugar and maybe what people might be able to do, like about it to limit the spike.
Yeah.
Oats, right?
I was going to say oats.
Oats, right? A common breakfast food all over the world,
Yes.
which may not be the best thing in all situations. Talk to us about oats.
So oats are a grain, and grains are full of starch. And as I explained, there's two types of food that create glucose spikes in the body, starches and sugars. So oats are a starch. And actually, if you look at starch, it's just one long chain of glucose molecules attached hand to hand. And when you eat starch, those glucose molecules get freed, and then it creates a glucose spike. So oats in the morning, if you're just having oats, you're just having starch, which means glucose spike. So if you have oats and you feel hungry 2 hours after eating them, or if you feel tired at any moment during the day, or if you have other symptoms that you want to take care of, you might want to look at your oats situation. You have two options. One, you can learn to put some clothes on those oats. So maybe some nut butter, maybe you can put some protein powder in there. Maybe you have a little egg, a little soft-boiled egg in the oats, make it like savory oats. You can find lots of nice little combinations to put protein, fat, and fiber in the oats. Other option, you just change your breakfast completely. And, and you go for what I call the savory breakfast. And in the Glucose Goddess method, lots of recipe ideas, beautiful. But the principle is the following. A savory breakfast that keeps your glucose levels steady and helps you feel amazing is built around protein. So eggs, fish, nuts, tofu, protein powder, leftovers from dinner, one of my favorite ways to get protein in. I had leftover butter chicken for breakfast this morning. I had Indian food last night. Butter chicken for breakfast. Perfect. And then you can add some fiber or some fat to that. So, olive oil, butter, avocados, maybe a bit of spinach if you want. And then the most important thing to remember is that in a savory breakfast, you should not eat anything sweet, except if you want some whole fruit for taste. No fruit juices, no jam, no sweet cereal, no sweet yogurts, etc. You can still have sweet foods later in the day, but for breakfast, if you want to set yourself up for success, it's very important to not have sweet food. And then starch you can as well, but for taste. So you can have some oats before taste, if your body really feels like them.
See, a lot of people will feel that they don't have time in the morning to make a breakfast, and they will get on the road to work and they'll stop off at a coffee shop and they'll pick up a coffee, and they may get tempted with pain au chocolat or croissants or pastries.
Get a ham croissant instead of a chocolate croissant, right? Because at least it has some protein in it. Or maybe on Sundays, you can make a big batch of soft-boiled eggs, and you can take a couple with you every day. Or in my book, I have a recipe for egg cups, which are really delicious. But at the coffee shop, maybe they have nuts. Maybe they have a toast with something savory on it.
Yeah.
But I agree, it's a difficult food landscape to navigate.
It really is. And I think, having a savory breakfast is game-changing when you've never done it. For years like you, I've been talking to patients about eat your dinner for breakfast.
Yes.
Cook too much, and in the morning, heat it up.
Absolutely.
And there's a couple of people to mind who, I won't share their story now. I think I've spoken about them on the podcast before, and I wrote about one of them in one of my books. Completely different experience of life.
Yes, I say that sentence. Absolutely.
It's just that they're going into the world, but their cognition, their work performance, their hunger, completely different.
It's like stepping through the mirror, in the movie.
Yeah. And if you think about what is the common breakfast now in the West, and not only just the West, in India, right? I used to go every other summer and spend 6 weeks in India because that's where all my family used to live, and many of them still do. And I can still remember so clearly that, I'd play with my cousins, but they were still at school in the summer, different timetables and different, year and term times in India. They would have a full-on meal before they went to school for the day. They'd have, they'd have vegetable curries. They'd have, a whole plate full of foods. And I remember, this is a little while ago now, but it all started to change when companies like Kellogg's got on and
Yes.
started marketing aggressively.
Yeah.
And it changed to being, these quick and easy, this is advancement, right? This is us making progress. We can make a quick and easy breakfast with cereal, milk on top, and off we go. But actually, through the lens of blood sugar, huge difference,
this
right?
was invented. We all used to eat breakfast that was just like any other meal.
Yeah.
And then food companies were like, cereal for breakfast. Let me think about that. It's really cheap to make. It's addictive. People will get pleasure from it. Let's tell them that they should have cereal and orange juice in the morning. That was invented. It's a marketing thing going on. The best thing for breakfast is dinner. I completely agree with you. Or even upgrade. Dinner in a pan, plus you crack two eggs. So you make like a little like a breakfast version of the dinner, right?
Yeah.
But completely like if you have something sweet and starchy for breakfast, massive glucose spike, glucose roller coaster, sugar addiction, inflammation, poor energy. So breakfast is really the worst time to eat just sugars and starches, but it's the time where most of us eat just sugar and starches.
And it's the common breakfast for children.
I know.
And I understand the pressure on parents, maybe two parents working, maybe not enough time, financial concerns. I understand
Or not
all of
knowing.
that. And not knowing, but it really isn't the best breakfast to give your kids, even from a school performance perspective. And I wonder how many behavioral issues at school mid-morning, right, which get detentions and gets sanctions for in the school. How many of those are actually blood sugar issues? It'd be very interesting to do a study on that someday.
I grew up eating a Nutella crepe every morning for breakfast from the ages of, 5 to like 16. Nutella crepe.
Now that does sound delicious.
And then I was exhausted at 11. I felt so hungry that my stomach would hurt, and it definitely affected my day on a daily basis. I just thought it was normal. But no, it was not normal.
What has your research shown about plant milks? Right, a lot of people these days are having almond milk, rice milk, oats milk. What is that doing to blood sugar? And presumably it matters what they're having it with.
It matters what they're having it with, but also matters what it's from. So if you look at milks that come from starches, so rice and oats are starches. When you make a milk out of them, you're essentially making liquid starch. And that's just pure glucose. When you look on a glucose monitor at what happens when you drink an oat milk coffee versus a cow's milk coffee, it's night and day. The oat milk or the rice milk will create a big glucose spike in the body. And it makes sense because you're just drinking liquid starch. So it's pretty obvious if you think about the source of it. If you have something like almond milk, at least almonds don't have that much starch in them. So it's a much better situation. Coconut milk is also better. Cow's milk if you're into dairy. But oat milk, unfortunately, massive, massive spikes in most people. Now, I know people really love oat milk. So here's my recommendation. If you don't have many symptoms and you feel pretty great and you have good energy, no cravings, whatever, no problem, and you love the oat milk, go ahead. I have nothing to teach you. But if you could feel better than you currently do, and if you want to help some of the symptoms you might be feeling, you might want to consider switching to another type of milk. Or you can also do another hack I have, which is if you want to eat something sweet, have it at the end of a meal instead of on an empty stomach. So to me, oat milk is like essentially sweet. So you can have it after your breakfast instead of on an empty stomach before breakfast. You can also go for a little walk afterwards. You can use some of the hacks to reduce its impact on your glucose. But really, it's not the vibe.
Yeah, it's not the best.
No.
Movement and blood sugar. This is quite an easy hack for people. It's been in many cultures for years, but as you've already explained, we've lost a lot of this kind of cultural wisdom.
Yeah.
What is the relationship between movement and blood sugar, and how can we utilize movement to mitigate the effects of what we've eaten?
So the mitochondria I was telling you about earlier, so the little factories that make energy, in our muscles, we have a lot of mitochondria, and they turn glucose into energy so that your muscles can contract. So when you're walking, when you're dancing, when you're lifting weights, playing whatever team sports, your muscles are using glucose to power themselves. And so we can use that to our advantage. And here's the hack. After a meal, use your muscles for 10 minutes. Now, this can be just walking. It can be cleaning your kitchen. It can be doing my new favorite thing, which is calf raises. So you just sit at your desk and you just put your feet planted on the floor and you just raise your feet up on your toes. So only your toes are touching. And you do these calf raises or calf push-ups for like 5 minutes. In any way you want to use your muscles, it's going to be helpful because as you're contracting your muscles, the glucose from the meal, as it arrives in your bloodstream, is going to be soaked up by your muscles and used for energy. So you're going to reduce the glucose spike of that meal without needing to change what's in the meal at all.
So yes, we can try and eat better quality meals to stabilize our blood sugar. We can change the food order. But let's say we don't want to make any changes and we've had a meal that we know possibly isn't the best for us in terms of blood sugar spikes.
Yeah.
You're saying if we do 10 minutes of movement after that meal, we can mitigate the effects.
Exactly. So within 90 minutes after the end of the meal, use your muscles a little bit. And really, it can be super simple. You can be sitting on the couch watching a movie after dinner, grab a bottle of water, and do like some bicep curls with the bottle of water.
Anything, basically.
Anything. And really, the calf raises are a really easy place to start. Your calf actually has a muscle called the soleus muscle, which is specifically excellent at soaking up glucose from the bloodstream. So the calf raises are a good option.
I saw this on your Instagram grid recently. Profound.
Cool, right?
And like, I always look at things through an evolutionary lens and think, well, what is so unique about the calf muscle?
We use it for walking.
We use it for walking.
Yes.
Exactly. And then, yes, of course, bicep curls, I get it. Simple, easy hack. But then if we think about it, most movements in our evolutionary past, I can't imagine our hunter-gatherer ancestors would just, for the sake of it, pick up something heavy and lift it. You know, they're not going to be utilizing energy unless there's a good reason for it, right? So it kind of makes sense that the soleus, the calf muscle, would be quite important here, wouldn't it? Because it's like, no, to get around, to get food, to move anywhere, to get back to safety, you need to use your calf muscle. So I don't know, talk to me about that because it kind of makes sense a little bit, doesn't it?
Wait, so you think that in hunter-gatherer days, the people didn't like work out for fun or like play games? Maybe they were playing games, right? Maybe you're like wrestling with your friends or...
Hey, to be clear, I don't know, right? I'm not claiming to be an expert.
You on this one.
Okay, I'm just sort of hypothesizing.
Yeah.
Why might the soleus muscle be so good at disposing of glucose compared to other muscles?
Maybe it's because I think you're right. I think the fact that we use it for walking means it needs to be really efficient at using energy. And your other muscles, of course, they use glucose, but this soleus muscle, it's very, very good at taking glucose from the bloodstream. So maybe it has something to do with that, that after you've eaten and you need to walk or run or whatever, you need to have a muscle that is going to be able to soak up that glucose immediately. Maybe. I don't know. I should look back at the study because I'm sure in the discussion they probably explain some hypotheses about why that's the case.
Fruit versus dried fruit.
Oh my God. I think this is one of my favorite topics.
Okay, let's go.
So you know how people say, well, it's fruit, so it's natural. Yeah, okay. So I have a scoop for you. The fruit that we have today in our supermarkets is not natural. Just like humans bred gray wolves into chihuahuas for their entertainment, humans have been crossing and breeding fruit for millennia to make them more appetizing for humans, to make them sweeter, to make them have fewer seeds, less fiber. If you look at an ancestral banana, it's tiny, it's full of seeds, it's quite dense, and it's not very sweet. If you look at a banana today, it's very sweet, very little fiber, very little seeds, super easy to eat. Humans have been creating these fruits to be extra juicy and extra sweet and extra full of sugar. So that's one thing to note. The fruit you see today in the supermarkets is not natural. However, a piece of fruit still has fiber in it. And fiber is protective, as I explained at the beginning. Fiber helps reduce the glucose spike of a meal because it creates that mesh in the intestine. So if you want to eat something sweet, eating fiber is still the best. Eating a piece of whole fruit is still the best thing to do because of that fiber blunting the spike from the sugar. The problem arises when we denature that piece of fruit. So maybe we're going to juice an apple. As a result, we're removing all the fiber from the apple and we're concentrating the sugar that was already being concentrated for centuries by humans in that whole apple. When we dry fruit, we take away all of the water. So we concentrate the sugar and we eat way more pieces of dried fruit than we would of regular fruit.
Yeah. And what's I think particularly concerning about that is there's quite a few companies now which are targeting children with dried fruit. And I think many parents are, again, I always say this, and I want to reiterate this point. I genuinely believe that all parents are doing the best that they can in the context of their life situation, the context of their knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not sure that those dried fruit packets are the best thing to be giving our kids, particularly on an empty stomach.
Yes, although you could argue that dried fruit is better than like candy because at least it has some fiber in it. But what would be even better if you really want to give dried fruit would be to pair it with some nuts, for example.
Yeah.
So you make a little snack with like a few like dried apricots and then some pecans or whatever. That's better because you're putting some clothes on the carbs, right?
I get it. And that's what I love about all your suggestions. They can be applied by anyone in any situation, no matter what diet they're following.
Yes.
Little hacks, little tweaks, just to make things a little bit better than they would have otherwise been, right?
Exactly. We're not talking like big overhaul of your life, of your food habits. No. Small tweaks, big impact.
Yeah. Adding those nuts into the dried fruit, you can see how it could be really tasty.
Yeah, absolutely.
And change the blood sugar response.
Absolutely.
Now, I had a thought there, Jessie. A lot of the time, the cultural wisdom that's there, we're now learning the modern science again. That's why that works. Now, the only place where I think your recommendations don't match up with certainly the ancient wisdom that I'm aware of is with fruit on empty stomachs. Because I know in Ayurvedic medicine, for many years, they have been talking about if you're having a piece of fruit, have it before your meal because then it's digested really easily, and it doesn't then sort of fester on top of your meal afterwards. Now, first of all, I'd welcome your thoughts on that, but just a little addition there, based on what you just said about the fact that the way fruit is bred now compared to how fruit is bred in the past, maybe 2,000 or 3,000 years ago, the fruit that we were getting, lower in sugar, not quite as sweet, maybe that worked then. Maybe it doesn't work so well now. I don't know. But what's your sort of perspective on that?
Well, this is a very common question. And I was fascinated by it. I was like, okay, where does this come from? Like, why do we think that fruit rots in the stomach if it's eaten last? And through my research, I found that there was a doctor in the Renaissance who said that fruit, and this is a separate branch from the Ayurveda stuff, but this doctor said that if you eat fruit after a meal, it's going to rot and putrefy in your stomach and create all these vapors and stuff. That doctor just said that. I mean, I don't know where he pulled that out of, but it just is not true. Like nothing actually rots or putrefies in the stomach. So that particular thing about the rotting is just not true. Nothing can rot in the stomach, actually. So there is this ancient wisdom about having the fruit on an empty stomach or at the beginning of a meal. And to that I say, well, we have two opposing views, right? We have the glucose science, which says if you want to eat something sweet, the best time for your glucose is at the end of a meal. And we have ancient wisdom that could also, have some really good sources. So maybe where we land is if you don't feel any discomfort by eating fruit after a meal, maybe you do that. And if you're somebody and your body's like, no, it's not working, maybe it gives you bloating or whatever, then you switch it up, It's up to you to sort of tailor these recommendations to other things going on in your life.
So what you're recommending is we take a pragmatic, nuanced approach to our health. Mind-blowing. It's 2023. That's not the way it goes.
Yeah, I know. And I think this is also why my work has been so well received, is that it feels fresh and nice, and it's no longer an extreme diet. It's not like cut out entire food groups. It's like, okay, guys, I think we're over diets. Like personally, I would rather we never, ever have any diets ever again. So what about we use all this recent science and we find these principles that are easy, that have a big impact on our physical and our mental health, that are not very hard, don't cost any money.
Yeah.
And how about we do that? And people seem to be quite happy with that approach.
Now, Jessie, it's almost impossible now to have the audience size which you have and not get pushback. Okay? I'm sure it's technically possible, but I would say it's almost impossible.
Yeah.
If and when people push back against your work, what is the common thing they say and how do you respond?
So I've experienced like multiple waves of this.
Okay.
And I sort of categorize pushback or criticism in two camps. So there's like The stuff that really I can't do anything about. For example, people who don't want to hear any information about food. Because because maybe they had an eating disorder in the past. Maybe they're just like, no. So for those people, my work is like, they just hate it because I'm talking about food. Those things I don't really pay attention to because,
it's not for them.
Exactly. And then you have the useful criticism. And from the beginning of the Glucose Goddess project, I've always really listened to feedback, whether it's in comments or in DMs or in real life, because my purpose here is to make science accessible, to make it inclusive, to make sure that I'm serving the people that I want to give this information to. So I would say the biggest criticisms have been from people with type 1 diabetes. Maybe this was a year ago that it started happening, that they didn't like that I was using a glucose monitor as a person without diabetes. And I really listened very carefully to this because a lot of people were sharing with me how saddened it made them that I was showing my glucose monitor, hey, I'm wearing a glucose monitor. And for them, it was a device that they need to survive. And so I really took that to heart. And I started thinking a lot about my glucose monitor approach and, whether I think it's for everybody. I stopped also posting photos of myself with the device being hey, glucose monitor. Now I really am just I'm using it to make the illustrative graphs, but I no longer use it as a fashion statement.
Yeah.
So that was really, really helpful. I think another thing that people push back on is the close on carbs thing. They say, yes, but if you take it to an extreme, it could be harmful. As I explained at the beginning, you could put 2 pounds of butter on a piece of bread and that would reduce the spike, but you need to have more nuance. And that I think I really address it in the book quite well. So
I think you do address it really well. I think, I've read both books and I think you're really clear that this is not to stress you out, right? This is not necessarily to be applied in every situation. This is to try and help you, right? Yeah, sure. In an ideal world, we'd all eat an exclusively whole food diet that was naturally stabilizing our blood sugars. But the reality is most people, or at least many people, are going to struggle with that.
Yes.
And I think particularly in this second book, this new book, the testimonials, I just love reading them. You mentioned eating disorders. There is a testimonial, right?
Yeah.
There's a testimonial. I can't remember which book it's in about bulimia and how a young lady, I think, with bulimia said your method has really helped them. And before you answer, I have quite a lot of thoughts on what you just said. And, I've been trying to communicate health messaging to the public since maybe 2014 now, through TV shows, books, podcasts, whatever it might be, right?
Yeah.
And you simply cannot anymore communicate health information and not get pushback. And the reality is not all information is for everyone, right? I try, I think like you do, to be as compassionate as possible when putting out that information. And now I can be relatively detached if and when pushback comes and go, I can actually learn from that. That's a good point. Or I actually disagree with that. Or I can see that person's being really, really triggered by something. This ain't about me. This is about them, right? So I think taking a compassionate approach to that has been really helpful. I understand what you're saying about the type 1 diabetics, and I can understand why certain members of that community may feel like that. But technology and progress is going to come in every form. CGMs are here. They're here to stay. They're only going to get more and more popular. Yeah. I do believe they can be a valuable tool for some people with the right education, with the right context. I think they can be an incredible tool for the right person.
Yeah. And to be fair, there's a whole other part of the community of people with type 1 diabetes who are super happy that I'm wearing one because it destigmatizes it for them.
There you go.
So there's always, pros and cons. And on the eating disorders front, I really got very interested in this topic and I spoke to many experts on the subject because I got a few comments being like, oh, these rules are just an eating disorder waiting to happen. And I thought that was really unfortunate that, we need to nuance something that's a diet and that's really unhealthy, unscientific, completely random and could cause some difficult behaviors, but also with advice that people need because people are dying. So, and that was a tough one for me to get through. I was like, okay, where do I land? What's true about not wanting to encourage disordered eating and what's true about wanting to give these very important pieces of information that are life-changing and potentially life-saving. So, but it's an ongoing journey, you know, the pushback. I try to learn from every thing that happens.
Yeah, you get this. I've definitely had it when we've done podcasts on fasting before. And I've thought long and hard about this. Is this irresponsible? Should I be doing it? And where I've landed is, you know, I try and caveat it. I try and make sure in the introductions to each podcast, we say this may not be suitable for people who are recovering from or suffering with eating disorders. Having said that, some people with eating disorders find fasting incredibly useful.
Yeah.
I know that because people have fed back. And also, let's just look at what's going on around us. You know, in America, what is it? 88 or 90% of people may be metabolically unhealthy, right? Stabilizing their blood sugar is going to save their life.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
And I think we all, and I know it's hard because I know sometimes it's parents of kids who are struggling. They've got like a 12-year-old or a 14-year-old who's really struggling with an eating disorder. And then they get often, and I can totally understand it, feel very defensive and upset when they see certain posts. But I'm not sure I have the solution to it, apart from trying to approach these things with compassion.
Yes.
I don't know, because not everything is for everyone.
Absolutely. And then, you know, you also have to remember that of the people reading your books, like listening to your podcast, reading your content, like 99% of people are so thrilled and happy. Yeah. And then there are a few people who are triggered or upset that will comment, and that's what we see, right?
Yeah.
But it's really not representative of the reality. That being said, I think, you know, I'm in the same boat as you, which is I try to learn and be as respectful and mindful as possible. And then once you feel like you've done the right thing, if somebody still doesn't like it, well, you know, so be it.
Jessie, it's been such a pleasure talking to you. It really has. I mean, we've not even scratched the surface over what's in your two books.
Yeah.
And I can see why so many people follow you online. So many people have been moved by your work. It's making a real material difference in their lives and therefore the lives of the people around them, right? That's something I'm so passionate about. If you can change one person, you don't just change them. They've got more energy. They're less moody, they're less cranky. That impacts how they parent, that impacts how they are with their partners, how they are with their work colleagues, right? So I think the work you're doing is so important. This podcast is called Feel Better, Live More. When we feel better in ourselves, we get more out of our lives. I think you would probably add, when we have stable blood sugars levels, we get more out of our lives.
Absolutely.
You know, how can you make disease disappear, right? But I think it really goes to what is our definition of disease. So I've been a medical doctor now for almost 20 years. And I can tell you that the bulk of what I see, I'd say probably 80% of what I see, is in some way driven by our collective modern lifestyles. And when we change our lifestyles in the right way, I have seen so many of these so-called diseases disappear. That's what I managed to demonstrate on my BBC show that's been shown now in 70 countries around the world. I've shown things like type 2 diabetes, vanished within 30 days, a change that has proved sustainable 2 or 3 years later. Panic attacks, anxiety gone down by 70, 80% in just 6 weeks by making these changes. Chronic back pain for 30 years, right? Once we started addressing the cause, completely gone. Okay, and the list goes on. I realized that no matter who they were, no matter what the name of their disease was, you know what? When you make simple changes in 4 key areas to your lifestyle, it is amazing how many of those symptoms just start to vanish.
You've said that this is the first generation being born now that has a shorter life expectancy than the generation before them, which is pretty terrifying.
Yeah, in the United States, and I think in the UK now as well, the current generation that are being born, have got a lower life expectancy than any previous generation before them, or certainly in our recent history. And that's pretty worrying, actually. I've got 2 young kids at home myself, and that makes me worry as what sort of world are they being born into? Are there now issues with health that are going to mean they're going to be less well off than the generation before them? And I think this really sort of plays into why there's such disillusionment at the moment with the way medicine is practiced. In the 20th century, right, even 30, 40 years ago, the bulk of what we were seeing
as doctors, the bulk of what was coming in and what people were complaining of were what we call acute problems. They responded very well to the sort of pharmaceutical model, the one pill for every ill model. So let's say you have a pneumonia, for example, okay? This one, modern medicine is brilliant. So a pneumonia, the overgrowth of a bug in your lung, right? You come in to see the doctor says, yeah, this is the issue, right? I'm gonna give you a pill to get rid of that bug, and then within a week, within 2 weeks, your problem's gone, right? The model of medicine we have now responds, was set up in that era. What we're seeing today in the 21st century is chronic disease, whether it's type 2 diabetes, okay, which is like a modern epidemic, whether it's mental health problems, right? In the UK, right, 1 in 4 people in any given year are going to have a mental health problem. Whether it's Alzheimer's disease, which, as we're living longer, people are now worrying, as I get older, how am I going to be? Am I going to be able to function? Am I going to be able to talk to my family, or I'm going to start losing my brain health and my memory?
We'll be back to the conversation in just a moment. Now, many of us struggle to find time to eat all of these incredible whole foods. That's why I'm a big fan of good quality whole food supplements like this one that's been in my own life for over 3 years now. It contains over 75 whole food source ingredients, vitamins, minerals, pre and probiotics, and can help us support our energy, focus, digestion, and our immune system. AG1 are giving my audience a fantastic offer: 1 year supply of vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first order. You can see all details at drinkag1.com/livemore, or just click on the link below. And now, back to the conversation.
So these sort of conditions require a different approach. And that's why life expectancy is going down, because we're not really well equipped to tackle these problems, because these problems don't respond to a one pill for every ill model. You've got to change multiple things, right? You've got to understand, and a lot of people still don't understand, including a lot of the profession, that these are conditions. There may be a genetic tendency, right? You may have a genetic predisposition. That is not your destiny, though. It doesn't mean you're going to get that condition. Right? We know there's the field is called epigenetics, which is basically this whole idea that, you're born with some genes, but your environment, how you live your life, that shapes and that determines whether those genes are switched on, if they're switched off, how those genes are expressed. And that's a big shift, actually, and that's exciting, because that means that in a huge part, we've got control over what happens to us. I think that's incredibly exciting. So we need to start teaching our children. We need to teach our doctors. We need to educate the public. We need to change the ethos in schools, in institutions, to sort of helping us foster a community where health is absolutely valued at the top. Because if it isn't, right, we're going to struggle in our lives. So, I've watched many of your videos, Tom, and when we talk about trying to make a difference, trying to live a meaningful and purposeful life, right? Health is an ingredient of that. When we feel better, we live more. So much of the time, the problems people are telling me about, the disagreements they're having, the family disharmony they're having, often it's because they don't feel good, right? They're putting the wrong things into their body. Whether it's food, they're not sleeping enough, that's changing their hormones, that's making them moody, that's causing them to have tension with their children, with their partner, with their work colleagues, and it all starts to add up. And I've realized that often my training has taught me to suppress that downstream symptom, right, with a pill, without actually going upstream and figuring out, well, what's causing this in the first place? And the approach I try and take on my TV show, with my patients, with my book, it's really about saying, we've overcomplicated health, right? I want to simplify it. And we've overly focused on one area. So obviously everyone talks about food when we talk about health. And food's important, right? But it's not the only thing. There are other factors that I would say are equally important, that even if you'd asked me 5 years ago, I wouldn't have known that. 5, 6 years ago, I thought it was all about food. right? But I've changed my mind now. You might be better off saying your diet is good enough.
Right.
Maybe the fact that you're on Netflix or YouTube till 1 a.m. every night and you're only sleeping 5 hours a night, actually, if you go to bed 1 hour earlier, you will find you get more bang for your buck than trying to cut out a little bit more sugar in your diet.
Yeah, one of the most interesting things about your approach is this whole notion of lifestyle over diet. As in, it's more important than that. And I thought, whoa, that's pretty radical. And 5 years ago, I would have said the same thing. I was at the height of building Quest Nutrition. I thought the answer to everything was what you were eating 100%.
Me too.
Right?
Yeah.
And then my wife ends up having this catastrophic problem with her microbiome. And it came on like that. It went from no sense of we have a problem to our life got put on hold for a year because she just couldn't eat and she was malnutrition. It really actually got scary at one point. And I thought my wife's diet is perfect. So clearly there's something going on here that I don't fully understand. Part of it was my definition of perfect was totally screwed up. And then the other part was that there are so many other lifestyle factors. Talk about this notion of the threshold effect, which I think is so important for people to understand.
Yeah, it's this idea that we've all got our personal threshold. Okay, so the way I explain it, if you were in my clinic with me right now, and I pretty much go through this with every patient, I say, look, let's say you were born in perfect health here. Right, we've got this sort of we've got a threshold, right? So we can deal with multiple insults up to a point. So that could be, poor diet, the fact that we don't move very much. We might have had a relationship breakup, which is a stress on our body. We may have a job we don't like, right? It's all building up, getting closer to our threshold. That's when they get sick, right? What I mean by that is often a patient will come in to see me and they'll say, doc, I was fine. Everything was going fine. And then, I changed my job, I don't like my new boss. And then, they come down with an autoimmune illness, right? But when you go into their history, you see things were not fine at all. We're very resilient as humans. We can deal with lots of stresses, right? But something is like the straw that breaks the camel's back. And you can find the last stressor that tips you up, that pushes you over, right? But when you've gone over your threshold, often it's not a case anymore of taking off that last stressor, right? Often you have to go back to basics and build from scratch. Again, it's like, if we were juggling balls, I often say, in your life when things get busy, you can juggle 1 ball, 2 balls, 3 balls, 4 balls, and then someone chucks a 5th one in, and what happens? Everything falls down. And, we always look for what's that one thing that it is. Can I give you a case story?
Yeah,
right.
Please.
This is a very typical patient of mine, but this is it was a guy in his 50s, I think he's a 52-year-old guy, right? He's got type 2 diabetes. Now he's a successful businessman. He's go all the time, right? He's, working hard, working weekends. He's always on his email, right? And he got diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. So he saw on TV in the UK, he saw my BBC show, the first series, and he saw what I did with that type 2 diabetic patient. So he drastically reduced the refined and processed carbs in his diet, okay? And then he'd read some other blogs and he really got obsessed with low carb. And he was getting some changes, right? His blood sugar was coming down, but then it plateaued. And he was getting frustrated because he kept reading more and more blogs. He kept lowering his carb intake and he just wasn't getting anywhere. So he ends up on my waiting list. He comes in to see me. And I remember going through everything with him and I thought to myself, this is not a dietary issue anymore, right? Because he didn't realize, like many people don't, that your stress levels contribute to your blood sugar levels. Your sleep quality contributes to your blood sugar levels. It's not just your diet. Even though diet is something we get it, we eat a bit of sugar, that's going to put the sugar up in our blood. We get that. But we don't get, right, and there's some really good studies on this, that if you only sleep 4 to 5 hours a night for 6 nights, okay, you are 40% less good at managing your blood sugar, right? Wow. You become pre-diabetic after 5 to 6 days.
Just from the lack of sleep.
Just from a lack of sleep. It's incredible. When you start understanding that, you think, well, of course we need a more balanced, holistic approach to helping these people. So this chap, so what I did with him, I said, look, your diet is brill, okay? Arguably, it's too good. Arguably, you're trying too hard now and it's stressing you out. I said it's sleep and stress for you. So I talk about these 4 pillars, right? I talk about food, movement, sleep, and relaxation. That it's not about perfection in any one pillar, but it's about balance across all 4. This approach takes the pressure off people. It's not about the perfect diet or the perfect gym routine. It's about making sure your diet is good enough, making sure you're moving enough, making sure you're doing something for your sleep and something for your stress levels. It's an approach that works in the short term, but it's also going to be working 6 months down the line, 12 months down the line. So this chat with type 2 diabetes, we came up with a system. I said, look, ideally, you'd have a 90-minute switch off before bed where you don't look at work emails, you don't go on your computer. He goes, I can't do that, 90 minutes, no way. I said, all right, what about 30 minutes? So he goes, okay. So we started with 30 minutes, okay? We agreed in the consultation, I spoke to him about meditation. And again, he was a bit skeptical on meditation. I said, okay, look, hear me out here. I tell you what, let's get an app, right? So we downloaded an app in the clinic, right? I said, okay, this is free. Download this. All I want you to do is commit to 5 minutes a day. That's it, okay? So all we agreed on was 30 minutes before bed, he'd switch off his computer and his tech and his work emails, and he'd do 5 minutes meditation per day with his app. Okay, that was it. And he starts off, and he comes back in 4 weeks, and he's like, okay, I'm already starting to feel better. You know, he's sleeping better. He feels less anxious and stressed the whole time. So that was my way in. Then we got to increase it. So it was an hour in the evening, okay? It was, he only stuck to 5 minutes meditation, but we then introduced something that I call the 3-4-5 breath. When you breathe in for 3, you hold for 4 and breathe out for 5. And he did that a few times throughout the week. And bit by bit, he started to introduce these practices. He increased his carb intake, because I said, you're being too aggressive. You don't need to be that aggressive with your carbs. Okay, 6 months later, the guy's blood sugar is no longer in the type 2 diabetic range. Wow. Okay, so he puts his carbs up, he improves his sleep, he gets the stress levels down, and his blood sugar starts to come down. And that's why I'm so passionate, Tom, that when we take this rounded 360-degree approach to health, not only does it yield fantastic results, okay, but it feels more accessible, it feels more achievable for people. I've got countless more case studies like that, but that's I think rather counterintuitive, because 5-6 years ago I was using that what is called a low carb approach a lot with my patients, and again, I'm not a huge fan of the term low carb. I think the beautiful thing about it is that it simplifies the concept so clearly that people get it. But I think, we have unfairly demonized fat for 30, 40 years. I worry we're going to do the same with another food group in the same way. And I think, ultimately, you look at these blue zones around the world, these areas around the world where people have got high rates of longevity. They're living to a ripe old age in good health. And you look at what they're doing. And I find it really interesting, because a lot of them are having high carb diets. Like in Okinawa, in Japan, they're having an 80% carbohydrate diet. Oof. But the carbs are not the refined and processed carbs that we're having here in the West, right? They're local sweet potatoes, right? Which is very nourishing. You mentioned the gut microbiome. Sweet potatoes and those sort of colorful vegetables are fantastic for our gut health. Absolutely fantastic. And I actually think that's what holds all the diets around the world which work well, right? I think the commonality is not the carb content or the fat content. The commonality is they're all a local, minimally processed food that nourishes our microbiome. That's what I think is the unifying factor. And the other thing, I think, when we look at these blue zones like Okinawa and we try and figure out, well, why are they doing so well? We're trying to figure out what is it in their diet that's the magic. But it ain't just the diet, it's the whole lifestyle, right? These guys have low stress levels. They sleep well, right? They're physically active every day. They prioritize community, right? That's why those guys are healthy, right? It's not just the one thing. And I think, why is it that this low carb approach seems to have such a fantastically beneficial role for so many people in the West? Well, I think what's going on here in the West, we are physically inactive, we are underslept, we're overstressed, we're having highly processed food, okay? maybe and all those things make you insulin resistant, which is what actually leads to type 2 diabetes and is behind a lot of cases of obesity. Maybe it's in this environment, in our highly stressed out, underslept Western environment, maybe it's in this environment that low carb approach has such a beneficial role. Maybe those guys, they stay under their threshold in a different way. They don't need to be as aggressive with their carbs, let's say, because they're getting all that sleep, they're getting their stress levels down. I think food is much more than fat versus carbs, but good health is much more than food, right?
Wow, that's really strong, yeah.
I've always been interested as a doctor as to what works in real life, right? I love the research papers, I love the science, but I'm more interested in how do you convert that into real life action for that person sitting in front of me. And I can tell you, one of my one of the most popular things from this book is what I call the 5-minute kitchen workouts. And this again came out of a need that I saw from my patients, right? So, strength training is very much undervalued in society. When we talk about activity and movement and exercise, right? We're always talking about, walking more or, doing more cardio. And there's nothing wrong with that necessarily, but we neglect strength. Right. And once we hit 30, right? Once we get above the age of 30, we can lose 3 to 5% of our muscle mass every decade.
Whoa.
We can be even more above the age of 50. And, your muscle mass independently predicts your mortality. It's one of the strongest factors to determine how well you're going to be when you get older. So I was seeing all the research on this about 5 or 6 years ago. And I remember patients were coming in and I say to them, okay, guys, strength training is really important. I want you to work out for about 30, 40 minutes, 3 times a week, maybe get to the gym if you can. And I thought, okay, right, I've told them about the research. I come back 6 weeks later, I said, hey guys, how are you getting on? Hey doc, I've been busy, the gym's a bit expensive, it's not on the way back from work, I've not really done it much. I thought, okay, I'm clearly not giving them advice in a way that they feel is practical for them, that they feel they can do in the context of their life. So I've got to do something better. And in that moment, in my consultation room, that 5-minute kitchen workout was born. I said, all right, I'll tell you what, let's forget about the gym. Let's forget about gym memberships, forget about buying equipment. I'm going to show you a workout you can do right here, right now, in your kitchen. I've got 20-year-old patients doing it. I've got 70-year-old patients doing it. You can modify it for any ability level. And I find that by setting the bar low with people, right, and they achieve that, they feel good about themselves. They start to do more. It's about simple approaches that work in real life. Yeah, the science is all in there, but the science interests me, but it doesn't dictate what I do. I've got to convert that into what's going to really help my patients. Real life people with busy jobs, with busy lives, right, who want to be healthy.
I want to talk about the show for a second, because being with people, living with them for 4 to 6 weeks and getting in there, what are you seeing that are patterns of, I'll call it bad behavior, but I don't mean that in like the moral sense. I just mean it has an unintended consequence that they may not even realize. And then what are some of the fixes that are these simple things? So like in the movement pillar, you've got that, something simple they can do in the kitchen. But what are things that you see over and over and over that people do wrong that have a really simple fix?
So I'd say a few things. Yeah, food was a big one. There's no question. When you open people's cupboards, you open their drawers and you see what's in there. You see the naughty drawers and you see the stuff that's in there. And then you also not only look at what's in there, which is basically all the highly processed food, it's all the sugary treats that live inside the house, right? But it's then as you're looking there, you see the family dynamic. You see like the wife, oh, that's not mine, that's it. He always brings that in. I tell him not to bring that in. He goes, no. The husband's like, no, that's not the case at all. I bring these in because you like them, right? You see that in every house. So there's obviously this dynamic that, who's responsible for it? Everyone's putting the blame without realizing it on other people. It's not me, it's, I'm doing it for the family. Right. So I find that quite interesting. So one of the fixes there is to control the environment you can control, right? If you're trying to make healthy, let's say, food choices, right? Don't keep that stuff in your house, right? So I say to them, when you walk outside your front door these days, you are having to exercise your willpower every step of the way. You go to a gas station, right, and you go to pay, you're walking past all the chocolates, all the bags of chips, everything, right? You're having to exert your willpower there. If you want to buy coffee in a coffee shop, right, you stand in line, you order, you're walking past the muffins, the pastries, the croissants. You're constantly having to use the willpower when you step outside your house. I'm saying don't use it inside your house, right? If you're serious about making those choices and you want a sugary treat, you know what? Have it. Once a week, once every 2 weeks when you go out and meet your buddies and you sit in a cafe and have it there. Don't bring it in your house, because what will happen is that you will come back tired, you'll come back stressed one day from work, you'll feel a bit low, and you will start gorging on what's in the house. You know, a few months ago, I was going through a very stressful time at work and all kinds of things were going on, and I was sitting at home in the evening with my wife and I thought, you know, I fancy something sweet. But I looked in the cupboards, there was nuts, there was olives. I was like, you know, I don't feel like those. I want something sweet, but there was nothing there. And you know what? 10 minutes later, that craving goes.
Right.
It's what I call an itchy mouth, right? I'm not hungry. It's just, you know, I fancy something to put in my mouth. So, you know, controlling the environment you can control, I think it's a very important thing that I taught all of those families to do. And they really, although they were resistant at first, they really saw the benefit.
All right, two things I want to dive a little deeper there. So, number one, do you ever get into the psychology of like, oh, I got this for you. No, you got it for you. What are you talking about? Do you ever just like put a finger on it and say, hey, let's talk about what's driving that?
Yeah, absolutely. And more these days than I even used to do, because I've realized that people have got very powerful emotional attachments as to why they do certain things. I'm going to tell you about the very first day I ever filmed for this documentary series, right? This is the first family. I rock up to this town called Shrewsbury in the UK. And, you know, a little bit nervous because I'm just like, oh, a camera crew that's going to watch me be a doctor and try and help these guys. Right, first time I've done that. And I meet the family, lovely family, that's been struggling with a whole variety of health issues. And I said, guys, what would you typically eat? Right? So the father says to the family, hey guys, you know, just the usual tonight? He said, yeah, Dad, just the usual, please. He says, come on, Doc, come with me. So I go, sit in the car, right? We drive 15 minutes out of town to go to a McDonald's drive-thru. On the way there, the guy says to me, he says, Doc, you know what? I know this stuff isn't good for us, and it's really, really embarrassing for me to actually be taking you here, but this is what we do. Right? And I don't think I quite got it back then, but I've reflected on this a lot since then, which is these guys knew that these weren't healthy choices. He knew that. But it was only when this third party comes in, someone who's got no emotional attachment to this family, he starts to feel really guilty. And he feels he has to apologize to me for the choices he's making, which first of all, he doesn't need to apologize. But I found that really interesting. What's going on there? Why do people make choices that, you know, are not serving them, right?
Why do you think they do it for real?
Because I think those choices, on some level nourish them. You know, if they're lacking something in some aspects of their life, they're feeding their reward pathways. You know, so many people will eat to make themselves feel better. You know, if they had a stressful day at work or they're feeling a bit low, food is a comfort for them. Food helps them feel better about themselves, albeit for a short period of time. You know, we all know that feeling. If we have a sugary treat, you know, we can feel good.
Yeah.
You know, we know intuitively that food can change our mood, right? There's a lot of science now behind all of that. But I think it's because on a deep emotional level, maybe when they were a kid, they were conditioned that, you know, you're not feeling so good, you're feeling, well, oh, should we have some nice sweet treats? And this particular family, for example, again, you know, the dad would say that I buy this stuff because it makes my wife happy. She really likes it. So in some way, he felt that he was doing a really nice thing for his wife. You know, his wife really enjoyed that sort of food. So he felt, as a loving husband, I'm going to give it to her.
Right.
You know, so I feel on some level he felt that was him helping, you know, his part of being a good husband. But I tell you, with that particular family, that as we went to McDonald's and he ordered the food, and what was incredible for me is that he ordered, it was £48. That figure is locked into my head. So that's about $65, $70 maybe, something like that, just for one meal for a family of 4. But then we got back to the house with the food, right? And check this. We got there, and in the kitchen, they've got trays, right? So they've got McDonald's trays in their kitchen. So they dish up onto the trays and they serve them. So this is what happened then. The son is sitting at the dining table, eating by himself, while sort of scrolling his phone at the same time. Okay. The mum, I think, was watching television. Okay. And she was eating, watching television. I think the daughter might have been on her phone at a different part of the living room, and I can't remember where the dad was. The point is that they're a family of 4. The food is already at the same time, yet they weren't eating together. Okay, they were mindlessly eating whilst also, doing their emails, sending text messages, doing their social media updates, whatever. And so the intervention I made with them, and I made it with lots of those families, is to have one meal a day with someone else, if possible, sitting around a table. And I'm telling you, Tom, that was transformative. That whole social connection piece, and one of the recommendations I make in the relax pillar is that eat round a dinner table for at least one meal a day with someone else if you can. You eat less when you do that, right? Why? Because you're not mindlessly eating. We can easily overeat when we're doing something else. There are studies showing that if you eat whilst watching television, you eat much more, right? We know the feeling. I know when I used to watch a lot of sports games on TV with my buddies, and there'd be like a bowl of crisps there or tortilla chips. How many of those things can you do whilst you're watching the game?
Yeah, it's super interesting the way that people deal with food. When you were talking about sitting there with your friends, watching a show, or probably watching a sporting event, honestly, and just munching. And I thought, a wave of like, I want to do that right now washed over me because it is so deeply pleasurable. And one of the things that I think is so hard when you're trying to make these sort of global changes to people is we optimize for short-term pleasure with total disregard for long-term consequence.
Yeah.
And even in the story when you were telling about the husband, it makes my wife happy and I want to bring it home. But at the same time, I've seen some of your episodes. The knock-on effect of things like that is also, she doesn't feel well, she has fibromyalgia, she's in constant pain, she's got a box of like supplements she's taking to try to mitigate some of just the lethargy or whatever symptoms she's having. And so it's like, yes, in the short term, you're giving her a drug-like effect and it does change her mood, but then it starts back in this whole cycle again, which without dealing with that entire relationship to food as essentially a drug, I don't see how people long-term get on the other side of this. So let's go through the 4 pillars really fast. Give me I know there are no universals, but I just want to get a sense of what is a problem that you think is sort of the biggest, most readily seen problem in each of the pillars. And then as we go, what's one quick thing that you want to see people do by pillar?
Okay. I'll tell you what, then, let's start with food. We've just been talking about food. I would say for people who are struggling with their diets and they're struggling with what to eat, I would say, why don't you focus on when you eat?
Interesting.
There's very powerful research now. A lot of it's coming out of California, the Salk Institutes, where they're showing that when you eat is arguably as important, or certainly of critical importance, as well as what you eat. So a lot of research has been done, particularly in animals initially, that's showing that if you restrict your food intake to about 10 to 12 hours, okay, right? You can eat whatever you want, 10 to 12 hours, right? You get improvements in your weight, improvements in your blood sugar, improvements in your immune system function, just from changing the hours that you eat. Because what happens when you go through a period of time where you're not eating, so once you've not put food in your body for about 12 hours, we think that a process called autophagy has kicked in. Autophagy is like house cleaning for your body. So just as if in your kitchen, if you didn't clean up every day, if the dishes, the plates were starting to stack up, by the end of the week, it wouldn't be a very pleasant kitchen to walk into. when we don't eat for 12 hours, that process autophagy starts to clean up the mess that's built up.
And is that the magic number, roughly 12 hours?
Look, for different people, it'll be different things, but 12 hours a day where you don't eat, for most of us, autophagy will have kicked in.
Okay.
So, and the reason I stick to 12 hours is that it's achievable. My approach is not about perfection in any one area. It's about doing a whole array of different things. And it's the synergy. That's where the magic happens. That's where you start to get all these different pathways in the body kicking in.
Information is not enough to make change in your life. You have to take action. So to help you take action after watching this video, I've created a free nutrition guide for you. This contains the 5 most important practices I've seen in over 2 decades of seeing patients. They work for you no matter what your dietary preference. There's a step-by-step action plan to help you implement those changes in your life. If you want to receive that free guide right now, just click on the link in the description box below.
Sure, if you think you're going to get more benefit from 10 hours or 8 hours, fine, go for it. But I'd much rather people go, yeah, I've got a tick there. I'm going to move on to another one.
Okay, so we have our tick there, and that was cool because it was not what I expected you to say. So that's food done. What are we going to do next?
Okay, I think if we go with movement, I would say do not neglect strength training. Okay? And I would say do a strength training workout, whether it's body weight, whether it's my 5-minute kitchen workout or your own favorite one, at least twice a week. But my approach, whether it's the food recommendation I just made, whether it's the movement recommendation I just made, or the sleep or relaxation ones, it's about simplicity. Okay, so that's what I'd say in move.
Okay, so that's food and movement.
Okay, sleep. Okay, I think this is arguably the most undervalued pillar of health. Okay, because in 2018, if you're not prioritizing sleep, you're probably not getting enough. It's just infinite distractions, right? We all know that feeling where we're still sat up late watching more and more content. And again, a load of great content out there, but it could be having a consequence. So I can tell you that the majority of people who are having sleep problems are doing something in their everyday lifestyle that they do not realize is impacting their ability to sleep at night. Okay? So my top 2 tips there would be a no tech 90, try and have 90 minutes before bed with no tech, right? But the counterintuitive one is get outside in the morning, right? A lot of people don't realize that these daily rhythms are set by light, right? In order to sleep at night, okay, you need a differential between your maximum light exposure and your minimum light exposure. So a dark room, right, has something called 0 lux in it. Lux is a unit of light. If you go outside on a sunny day for about 20 minutes, you get about 30,000 lux. Brilliant. So that's a really big differential. If you go outside on a cloudy day, you're getting about 10,000, 15,000 lux, right? If you go into a brightly lit office, a modern brightly lit office, you're getting about 500, maybe 1,000 lux maximum, right? So everyone's thinking about what they do before they go to bed in the evening. But a life-changing tip, and this has transformed the lives of so many of my patients, is get outside in the morning for half an hour. Even that will help you sleep in the evening.
Okay, what if I live somewhere super cold and that sounds like pain? Is sitting next to a window gonna work?
No, you've got to get outside. Okay, and I go through, there's so many ways you can do this. In the UK, in January, it's not that easy to want to go outside. It's dark. Right. It's often dark till 8 a.m. It gets dark again at 3:30 p.m. I will sometimes put my fleece on, right? And I'll sit outside and have my coffee in the morning outside just so I get that light exposure. Because it's that fundamental to how we are as human beings. We need natural light.
Okay, and last but not least, relax.
Okay, relax. Again, there's a ton of suggestions, but I think the one I'm going to choose is 15 minutes of me time every day. Okay? Something for you and you alone. Something that does not involve your smartphone. Okay? And you're not allowed to feel guilty about it. It could be anything. It's important. It could be literally sitting in a cafe and enjoying your cup of coffee, but not rushing and taking it and trying to do a million things. Just sit there and people watch. Or just sit and read a book. Right? Something. We have lost stillness from our modern lives, and we need to get it back. You're the architects of your health and happiness. You understand what works for you and what doesn't. So
the locus of control has to shift from the doctor to the patient. That's the key thing of the transformation of healthcare. Is the doctor in charge or is the patient in charge? And the group is the structure by which that locus can be transferred and the patient can actually participate.
So let's get into that. People currently think medicine is, I have a problem with my health. Whatever country you live in, then it could well be, I phone to make an appointment with a healthcare professional, maybe a doctor, maybe someone else, but because then I can tell that person about my problems,
Yep.
and they, with their training and expertise, can actually tell me what's wrong and what I need to do.
Yeah.
And the benefits of that for me are, the sold benefits are, I'm going to get expert advice
Yep.
from a professional. My healthcare is private. I don't have to share it with anyone. This is a private thing. I've got a one-on-one consultation. Yet what you're doing with groups is showing that this model that we're used to, that all healthcare systems that I'm aware of are currently set up around,
Yeah.
are fundamentally problematic for many of the conditions that we see.
Yeah. Let me give you my favorite example.
Yeah,
and it's
please.
actually here in the UK. So Dr. David Unwin, 2016 NHS Innovator of the Year. What is he doing in his practice? So the first thing he works out is that type 2 diabetes is reversible with diet. And you know this better than anyone because you did it on the TV show like 4 times, right? So he realizes that. But it's quite like labor intensive to do that in a one-on-one GP visit when you've got a million other things to do. So Dr. David Unwin starts these type 2 diabetes groups, which is essentially community support plus a low-carb diet. That's pretty much what it is. So he implements it into his GP clinic, and over the next 5 years, reverses type 2 diabetes in the majority of the patients who have type 2 diabetes in his clinic. The savings on medication alone from doing that is almost £70,000 in that clinic. And they've shown that, and this was in the BMJ, that if you extrapolated that out to the whole NHS, that would save £270 million, £250 million. One chronic condition, right, just being done a little bit differently in a group, supported in that way. So, you know, if we're here, if we want to talk about the transformation of the NHS, and you're looking at, you know, what sort of examples do we need to lead out of the pandemic to the future, look at that and say, look, is there an example? Is that a good example of what we look? Lower cost, more access, more love, more accountability, more support, more professional satisfaction.
Patients getting better as well.
Patients getting better and not reliant on the healthcare system.
I mean, that's incredible. And you think those savings should have anyone in any healthcare system, their ears should be pricking up, going, okay, how do we do that? And you obviously know how to do it because you're doing it, right? And I'm very hopeful that what you're doing in America, you're going to be able to bring to the UK very, very soon, because you're figuring out what the obstacles are, what the problems are. We'll come to that, right? But what is it about a group then, right? What is it? You said earlier, the most powerful thing for someone who struggles with their alcohol intake and, you know, wants to reduce it and ultimately get off it, is to know another alcoholic who no longer drinks.
Absolutely.
What is the magic in the group that they're not getting from the expert?
Yeah. There's a key person that I would the term that I would use is a health coach, right? And that's the term that we use in America. And essentially the health coach, it's not a health professional. It's not a dietitian. It's not a nutritionist. It's really it's the equivalent, in my estimation, it's the equivalent of the mentor in Alcoholics Anonymous, the sponsor. It's someone who's overcome a chronic illness, has learned a ridiculous amount through that process. They have the lived experience of the disease. They have the lived experience of the reversal. And now they can be this peer leader where you now know someone, you know, you're able to essentially hold space for someone else to come to their own conclusion, right? To support people in coming to that. So in the groups that we run, we have this health coach. In Dr. Unwin's model, what he realized is the first couple of people that he helped reverse their type 2 diabetes in the clinic, put them in the group, right? So it's not just Unwin saying, hey, the science says this is the most optimal thing, look at the science. It's like, here's Jane, and Jane did it. Jane, tell us about your experience. You know, when we run these groups, I'll tell you something else. So now we're doing it virtually. You'll love this. Think about when you come on the first Zoom with a bunch of people you've never met. Most people have their camera off on the Zoom because what is this? I don't even know what I'm getting into and doing that. So what does the coach who hosts these groups, what are the first thing they do? They share their story of their own chronic illness, how painful it was, how traumatic it was, the effect on their whole family, then finding this new operating system of care, lifestyle medicine, starting to take care of themselves, learning, and then their journey back to being not having the chronic illness, right? That journey. Bing, bing, bing. The Zoom cameras turn on because people feel safe to be seen because they're like, that's me.
This reminds me of one of the biggest things people complain to me about, whether it's in person or on DMs on social media, is I don't feel seen and heard by my doctor. I don't feel they got me. They didn't really take it seriously. I don't feel they really cared. Now, let me just defend the medical profession for a moment. I understand that the system makes it very hard sometimes. If you are working in a model where there's 10-minute consultations, but even if you can do that as a doctor, it's not as good as someone who has had the same experience as you've had, is it? And I can just see how that would be so powerful, where suddenly that person is like, yeah, I get it, it's hard, I get it, it has an impact on your relationship. Sometimes you don't want to get out of bed, your kids need taken to school, you've got no energy. That's what connects you to someone else. Now suddenly that has more resonance. It's more like, oh, and you know those struggles, you know what that feels like, and you've got through them onto the other side. Okay, tell me more. I'm really engaged now, rather than the more distant, the less engaged approach it might be in a more conventional sort of appointment system, one-on-one with a doctor.
Yeah. I mean, the question I would just ask anyone who's listening to this is like, if you have a chronic condition, how many other people do you know who had that chronic condition and reversed it? And if the answer is 0, you need to find those people, and they're out there. They have their own podcasts and books and other kind of things in almost every condition, right? But ultimately, there's something super critical to learn from someone who's been in your shoes. And most people who have a chronic illness feel extremely isolated because they don't know anyone else that's going through the same thing. If you're addicted to psychotropic medication or pain medication, you don't know anyone that is, and ultimately those relationships may not be, empowering. And ultimately what we've seen is that if you can find other people that have gone on the journey that you're trying to go through, there's a shared resonance, there's a shared experience, people feel safe, right? That's it sends community, sends the signal of safety, right? You're safe here. This is a safe environment where you're able to share because I'm starting off by sharing my experience, and now it's safe for you to share. And look, some people feel safe straight away. They're like, oh, great, I've been waiting to tell my story. But other people, it takes weeks or months. And that's why the episodes of care that we've made is a 6-month group, right? Because
what does that mean, episode of care?
So like, when in our model, when a doctor prescribes you into the group is 6 months long. And the goal is each month we focus on one of the pillars of health. So the first pillar is community and connection. The first month is really about, can I create trust in this collective, right?
Hence the first question, which of your friends, which of your community, which of your family are going to support you in this change, right? So that all feeds into this first pillar, community.
Yeah. Other things that we do in that first month, SMART goals, right? Everyone who's ever made any sort of changes in business or otherwise in coaching, the SMART goals, right? So what is your goal for this next 6 months? You've got enough time to do something really transformational. What do you want to do? And it to come from you. It's no longer the doctor saying, you should reverse your chronic disease in the next 6 months. It's like, I'm going to reverse my chronic disease in this 6 months. That's what I'm going to do. And that's like an internal motivation that's coming from them. The other thing is, how did I get here? Right? How did I end up with a chronic illness? Right? One of the things that I think people hate this the most is that in their mind, the doctor's kind of telling them it was like healthy, 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 lupus. it didn't go down like that,
Yeah.
right? The body was breaking down over time that eventually leads one marker to be at a point where you have lupus, but it was a slow,
Yeah.
dysfunction, right? Over time, you got more and more dysfunctional, and then at a certain time, your hemoglobin A1C goes over 7, and you've got type 2 diabetes. But you had something was going on before. You weren't just healthy. It didn't just happen, right? So really understanding sort of like the where the illness came from. So that's like month 1. And then also we pair people with what we call a progress partner. When we started out, it was an accountability buddy. Turns out accountability is not that sexy and people don't want it. But you just call it a progress partner and everyone's like, oh, I want progress, that's cool.
So it's the same thing, but
the same thing.
you've rebranded it to be something people want.
So then month 2, what do we do in month 2? What is the one thing that you can do that will make the biggest shift in your potential for chronic disease? What's the answer?
Change your diet.
Food, right? So in that month, the goal of this program with each month is, can I make one permanent change to what I eat? Now, the reason why you need a month is because you need time to fail, right? To try, do something, fail, come back into the collective, share why it didn't work for you, and then sort of reshift that, the plan. Whatever the plan was, if it didn't work, why didn't it work? Deal with that, and then come up with something that's going to be real. And that's why we have challenges. And the challenges are really simple. In week 3 of each month, the challenge is like, eat a few new vegetables. Like as an example, what is the impact of someone eating a few new vegetables on their physiology, right? If then you do it for the next 5 months, it can be transformational, right? So there's that. So that's, month 2. Month 3, stress. Right? How do you deal with stress? How do you, what are the ways that you deal with stress? Can you try some new stress reduction techniques? Month 4, sleep. I've heard you say a million times that a good night's sleep starts in the morning. So we really focus on what is your morning routine? The sunlight, having good sleep hygiene, not having the phone in the room. We've had some people who come through the group who are doing all of these perfectly, but their smart goal is, I want to change my relationship with social media. Right? It could be that kind of thing. Like people have their own goals, and that's the whole point. It's not like the doctor is saying, you need to do this. It's like people are coming up with their own one. The 5th month is all around movement. So it's like creating regular movement and structures where you can move every day. And then the 6th one is your environment. And so what you see, if you make one permanent change in each of those things, you are a dramatically different person by the end. And the outcomes prove it out. So anxiety, depression, pain, fatigue, sleep struggles. In our groups, the vast majority of everyone who has those issues in the groups have a remarkable transformation in that 6 months, a clinically significant reduction in those areas.
It's just, like a lot of the best ideas, they're just so simple at their core.
Yeah.
It makes so much sense. I'm sure everyone gets that straight away. If you're doing this with people, other people who are trying to do it at the same time, you've got the support. Hey, I tried to do that, guys. I fell off the wagon. This happened. Someone else is like, I get it. I did that, but this is what I've tried. This is what I helped.
Yeah.
And it's and the fact that you have a month on each pillar, and the request is you just make one permanent change in that month. It makes it very manageable.
Yeah.
Reminding me, before March 2020, this podcast was having lots of podcast clubs around the world. Certainly in the UK, there were, I think, at least 60 or 70 in the UK around the country where people were getting together. They were getting together with other Feel Better, Live More listeners and going for walks together and discussing what changes they were making from the last episode. And actually, I was about to attend one near to my house. They invited me. I thought, I'd love to go.
Yeah.
So whoever that was, if you get back in touch again, I would love to start coming. But again, I think it's, even if you take a podcast, right? People listen to the podcast often while going out for a walk, or they're going for a drive somewhere by themselves.
Yeah.
And they might get inspired by the conversation, think about their lives differently, go, I want to make that change.
Yeah.
But then they have to go back into their regular life with their friends and their community. And often it's a life that the reason they've ended up with a health problem in the first place, their life actually, in some ways, is not supporting that health outcome they want. It's actually supporting the health outcome they've currently got.
Yep.
I know it's so obvious when you say it like that,
But then the onus is very much on, how do I make this change? How do I make this change myself? And it is this power of the group. I think, I want to come back to your example in just a minute, but if you take it outside medicine for a minute,
Yeah.
think about practices people like to do, let's say yoga. Like a lot of people like to practice yoga. And because of busyness in life and how many things people feel that they have to do these days, it clearly saves you time if you do a yoga class online or from a YouTube video, right? You don't have to go, you don't have to travel to it, you don't have to find a parking space or whatever you might do.
Yeah.
So yes, it may be more efficient time-wise to do it at home. But actually, again, we miss out a big piece. There's something, if you are in person with another 20 people who also want to practice yoga, and the interactions you get beforehand, the struggles other people may have, and then you see what the teacher says to them, you go, oh, you know, maybe that's what I'm, you know, there's something about being together. I'm not, Of course, it's not either or, but I often say to my patients, if you like doing this at home, you do 10, 15 minutes a day on Zoom or on a YouTube thing, if you can, go to a real life club as well, or a class where you're surrounded by other humans. And it really is transformative, isn't it, when we engage with these groups?
Yeah, super transformative. There's another amazing example from the UK that I'd love to share with you, because I guess the question might have people like, what does this look like at scale? Like, could this really be a transformative agent for the world, like if it was done? And right in the UK, there's another great example, actually quite near where I grew up, and it's a town called Frome. And you've actually had
Julian Abel
on the podcast
a couple of years ago.
You know, their thesis was exactly this: people are lonely, and that's driving, you know, these health outcomes. So in Frome, which is 115,000 people, what they thought is, could we solve loneliness? Could we cure loneliness in the town of Frome? And how are we going to do that? There's 5 medical practices. So they hired a coach for each of these practices. The coaches spend half their time in the clinic speaking to people, and half the time in what they call these talking cafes, right? Where people, they sit in cafes and actually just meet with people. But the key thing that they did is they took an inventory of every group that was happening, not just health groups, but all kinds of groups, church groups, sports groups, men's groups. They took a whole inventory. There were 2,000 groups. They whittled it down to 400 that were regular, anyone could join, had a constant location, consistent location. And so essentially this was a website where you could see, and essentially what people would do if they came in and they saw that these people were lonely, especially older people, they would sit with the coach, and the coach would say, what do you like doing? What do you want to be part of? What, do? And then say, hey, look, here are the different options. Which one you go? Meets this time per week at this location, go get them. The other thing that happened is they recruited 1,500 just people in the community that walk around with this green lanyard, right, to let them know that they're a community connector. And they would just send people to the website. They had no role apart from say, hey, here's the website, go to it, find something for yourself. So in a time where the healthcare costs and everything was going up in Somerset, which is in the town, emergency room admissions went down, recidivism on drugs went down, and loneliness was essentially solved by one small town in the UK. So on one end you have the David Unwin example of reversing chronic illness in small groups. On the other end you have sort of like a societal shift driven by medicine again. And ultimately, the solution, in my estimation, to the super elegant solution to so much of healthcare is sort of at the nexus of those two things. And Julian has said it himself since I've had a chance to know him, is that he realized the first thing was to get people in these groups. But if you can potentiate that connection with some sort of other healthy behavior, it's sort of almost exponentially more healthy. So like you said, going to yoga and doing a yoga class. So rather than just meeting and sitting around, what if we spend our time doing a mindfulness exercise, or we actually do movement together, or we actually eat as a community? So
this goes back to the first question you guys asked people in the groups.
Yeah.
Who in your life is going to support this transformation?
It's a critical question.
Because for many people, of course, in their current life, there is no one.
Yeah.
But by having these groups, suddenly you now, you're part of a new community, a new tribe, where actually these people will support it. And I think this also, I wonder what the experience has been for people who've gone through these 6-month groups, what it's done to their friendships, because it's not necessarily either or, like, you know, oh, I'm going to become healthy now, so my current friends no longer serve my life, because that can be very, very scary for people.
Yeah.
I don't think it has to be that extreme.
No.
It's you know, these friends can still serve me, and I can still enjoy hanging out with them, but actually it speaks down to, it speaks to this idea about relationships, right? It takes a village, right? We can't expect our partner to be everything.
Yeah.
And therefore, maybe our romantic partner plays certain roles in our life. Maybe our friends play certain roles in our life. And maybe our health goals might be done by another group. It depends on who you are, of course.
Yeah.
A lot of people have got friends they like to go walking with or yoga with or whatever. Do you know what I mean? It doesn't have to be one formula for everyone. It's like
Totally.
different people in your life are going to help you with different needs, but have you actually intentionally thought about it?
Correct.
Have you thought about who is helping these needs that I have?
Yeah, and you know, you need time to work all that out.
Yeah.
Right? You need time and space and a proven process that does that. My men's group did that for me. And honestly, being in the men's group and being a guy that's making a group medicine business and, you know, trying to get the whole world to do group medicine has actually been extremely instructive, because the men's group's not a health group, right? The men's group is really an emotional maturity group. There's many different things that it is, but ultimately in my group, I've seen people give up drinking, give up smoking, you know, transform the relationship with their significant others. You know, I've seen, you know, business success, all of that.
This is the key thing, James, to me, right? I'm sorry to kind of keep hammering home this point, but I think this is the key point for me as I hear what you're saying. This is not a health group, right? It's not a health group.
Yeah.
Yet people are having health outcomes. They're having amazing health outcomes, giving up smoking, giving up alcohol, whatever, business success, improving their relationships, right? It's not a health group, yet they're having health benefits. And this speaks to this wider idea that a lot of the problems we're now seeing, we talk about them being lifestyle related, and of course they are to a certain degree, but maybe actually, as you say, going upstream even more, they're a consequence of the lack of community that we all have, or many of us have in our lives. A couple of things I want to say about these men's groups. They've had a transformative effect on you. A really, really close mate of mine joined one about 3 years ago and said, you know, he raves about it. Says it's completely changed his life, his relationship, his ability to be a good father, his ability to be a good husband, his work, all sorts of things. Now, I've heard that. I've heard it from him. Mm-hmm. I've just heard it from you.
Yeah.
I'm not a part of a men's group. Okay. And honestly, you know, I spend a lot of time with my wife and my kids. I spend a lot of time working. I love my work. But I have often thought that, you know what, you don't really have really good quality, close friends, talking to myself, near where I live.
Yeah.
You know, I don't. And I've got really good friends from uni that I speak to a lot, but they're all like hundreds of miles away.
Yeah.
And last night was a really great example for me. So I'm in London, right? Meet you for dinner. Ayan comes along, Rupi comes along, we're having a laugh. And I knew in my head, part of me was like, I'm not going to stay long, get back to the hotel room, do a bit more prep for the podcast tomorrow with the guests. You know, I had a chap called Sachin Panda beforehand. But I realized as I was there, man, this is awesome. I am able to really be myself and just, you know, I'm not Dr. Chatterjee.
Yeah.
With you, with Ayan, with Rupi, I'm just me.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And I know it's, of course, it is me who shows up as Dr. Chatterjee on the podcast more and more than it ever has done. But still, there's something about
just being open and honest, sharing the things you're struggling with, sharing the things that are going well, then I realized actually, for me at this moment in time, I'd rather spend another 2 hours with these guys, even if it means I get less sleep tonight. That is going to nourish my soul much more than sleep will nourish my physical body tonight. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, to think that I would give, as an entrepreneur and a father and whatever, give 3 hours of my week to be with a group of strangers, like at the beginning, it doesn't seem like that's a good use of time, because there's millions of other things I could be doing, and I could justify it a lot of different ways. But it really adds quality to everything else in a very interesting way, and it's nourishing, and it creates like safety and nourishment in a way that other things just can't.
Why are men's groups on the rise so much, and why, or in your view, why do we not hear as much about female groups? Is there something fundamentally different in how we're wired? Is something to do with society? Have you seen any gender differences in this, I guess, wider across society, but then also within the groups that you're doing for chronic disease?
Well, in our chronic disease groups, the vast majority of people that sign up are women, which is interesting. So, you know, I think I don't feel that I know enough about those dynamics to like really understand it. But I would say, in general, the kind of the people that show up for lifestyle medicine are majority women. The numbers, you know, the doctors that practice it are, you know, it's a lot of women too, because I think they understand at a sort of a fundamental level nourishment and empowerment, support. It's just, you know, something that's, you know, part of, you know, part of them. I think men are needing it more and more, because I think a lot of men realize that the sort of like competitive side of men, and the sort of like emotionally dysfunctional part of men that is sort of celebrated in society in a weird way, ends up being like quite detrimental to their relationships, their ability to lead, manage people, work with people, have good long-term relationships with people. And I think that there's just sort of a new generation of men who realize, like, you know, if I want to be able to feel feelings and have a truly human experience on my time here, it's going to take work, and I don't know what to do. So I want to go and find some people who do. Right? The average, you know, the other people in my men's group, there's a guy who's 65, there's a guy who's 60. You know, that I'm one of the younger people in the group, and these are people that in some cases for 20 years have been doing this work. They still have their own stuff, but they're working through it. But their advice is so powerful, and it's the same energy of what we're talking about with the health coach. It's just like a kind of an unpaid life coach. You know, the whole thing's free. Right? There's no cost for me to be in the men group. It's just the only cost is that we meet in this random room at a church, and we pay them, you know, a tiny amount to be part of it.
Like you said last night, people helping people is the only inexhaustible resource we have.
100%.
Like, I couldn't stop thinking about that last night.
Yeah, I mean, look, if you look at, say, we want to save the NHS, and then it's like, well, there's not enough resources. There's this one resource that's inexhaustible, and it's ridiculously powerful, and it's being used to 0% of its potential. That's what to build around.
Yeah. Just speaking to men and women, and again, these aren't gross generalizations, but you know, one thing I've noticed when I go for walks around my neighborhood is you often see women walking with other women. I don't know, look, you live in Sacramento, I live in the northwest of England, right? I have observed, this is not a scientific experiment, this is, you know, just to be clear, this is just my observation, where I live, what I've seen. Well, you know, I'll take my wife will often go for her walk with her friends. They arrange to meet. I never do that. My walk is always by myself, always. Whereas hers, I would say 80% of the time is with someone else. So that you'll catch up with someone, connect with them, and you'll walk together. I see that around me. So I find that quite interesting. And there could be a whole variety of societal reasons why that is, of course, but whatever, that's what I've observed. We talk about loneliness and how harmful that is for our health. Way more, you know, I'm really at the stage, James, where I actually genuinely believe that not having a tribe around us, feeling lonely, and correcting that is possibly more important than the food that you eat.
Yeah.
I think,
it is. There's science to show that it is.
And that's huge, because when we think about loneliness, a lot of people think about the elderly stuck by themselves or in homes. Yes, that's a big issue. In the UK, and I suspect it's the same in America, the loneliest group in society, I think, are men between the age of 30 and 50. And that is a group where there is a very, very high rate of suicide. This is massive. And again, so that's really interesting. And then you talk about these groups that you are helping set up in America.
Can I just say one thing onto that?
Please.
Because I've actually seen research that's saying that younger people are infinitely more affected by this than everyone because of the society that's been created. Social media, way people connect. I saw research saying that one in 4 British teenagers didn't have one friend. Right, and you know there's an epidemic of mental illness in the teens, right? Think about how these teens connect. Like, if your friendship group is in a chat in Fortnite, that is not a healthy behavior. That is not a supportive community. That is people, that's a chat stream inside a video game that is unhealthy in its own right. Like, where are kids getting together to be with each other and not be on their technology? There's sport. There used to be church, there's no church. It's like there's these structures that used to exist where kids would come together and play. And ultimately, we are creating a seriously mentally ill, younger population. I'm seriously concerned about it. And yet, it's pretty exciting to see, what's going on with kids when they get access to these kind of tools. Like in the work that we're doing now, we're selling our program to pediatricians because the pediatricians are dealing with 13 to 18-year-old kids who the highest ever rates of mental illness. And those kids, because grandma isn't around in the community, are not getting the training that we once got on how to be healthy, right? The community is not reinforcing healthy behaviors. So you need to go through a 6-month program to learn healthy behaviors, how to deal with stress. You need to be in a community of other people who are doing it. So I actually feel this is sort of just like a fundamental training in how to be a human that is missing from society, that is only reasonable that we need to put back in. And the only place where there's like budget assigned to do it is in the medical system. And so that's why it has to come from there, even though it should just be a societal gift.
The pediatric thing's interesting. Ian said last night, of course, over dinner that, and for people who don't know, Ian's been on the show a few times. He's a brilliant NHS GP. And he knows, because we run a course together, as you know, called Prescribing Lifestyle Medicine, and we've trained thousands of healthcare professionals and doctors all over the globe now in terms of some of these principles. And a lot of these people we train are very interested in group medicine. They get it, they can see it, but they don't know how to do it. Like, the system is not set up, which is where I think you can come in. But Ian said some really good friend of his has used an element of this group medicine with pediatric respiratory patients.
Yeah, that was amazing.
Right, and when he shared that, actually, their admission rates to hospital and how many times I have to go to A&E now, I think it was with asthma, he said, gone right down, because these families and kids and their mum and their dad are helping each other. So what's interesting to me, a lot of these doctors we train up, they want to do this, but they don't know how.
Yeah.
Right? So what is it you've learned? Because you are, as I say, you're transforming healthcare in America, you're putting this into practice. What do people try and do? What do they get wrong when they try and do this? What do they not get? What are some of these key things that you've learnt?
One, doctors should definitely not be doing it.
Okay,
That's the key thing.
Why?
Because the doctor is an expert, and the doctor has spent their last, however long their career is, probably since they were 10 years old, being validated for their expertise, their retention of knowledge, their ability to regurgitate that knowledge. And ultimately, when you're in a group and someone asks a question, the most important thing to do is not answer the question. The most important thing to do is to let someone else in the group answer the question, because then you're building trust in the collective. And all the doctors that I know that are amazing at this, and I know the best ones because I interviewed them for my book and I've spent time with them, they actually had to go through a deconstruction of their own ego to be able to actually hold a group, because it's so tempting to answer the question because they're an expert. And we're moving out of this era, like there's definitely room for experts, 100% we need experts, but not in group medicine. We need peers, we need support, we need mentorship. And that is not being done by a doctor. When we first started running these virtual groups, we had some doctors say, oh, I've done a weekend in coaching, I can do it, I'll run the groups. It was a disaster. There's also still this there's this thing where the doctor has the white coat, right? And there's this inbuilt relationship that sort of patients have with what they assume doctors are going to be like. And that can be actually, that can be unhelpful in creating trust in a group. So the first thing is, look, we've worked together for a long time. I think getting doctors trained in lifestyle medicine, getting trained in this sort of lifestyle first, root cause approach to health is amazing. And I did it for 10 years and I'm still involved in it. But what I've come to see is that the quickest way to facilitate the transformation is for the doctor to prescribe it. Because there's something about the prescription, patients still will follow the prescription of the doctor.
So I prescribe that group for you.
You prescribe, you're going into this group, but then the doctor doesn't run the group, right? The only reason why you need the doctor in the group is to de-prescribe the medication. That's what we're seeing in America right now. The most exciting is chronic pain, right? Before COVID came along, opiates was the biggest issue in America, right? Overuse of opiates, chronic pain. So in our groups, the doctor actually comes in once a month, and their only reason why they're there, well, there's many reasons for them to be there, but the biggest thing that they're hopefully doing is telling patients, yeah, you could probably come down a little bit on your prescription now. De-prescribing, the doctor has to be there because there's a lot of factors and the doctors have to know it. But ultimately, the first thing we see is that doctors shouldn't be running the groups. The coach, this peer piece is a part of it.
That's empowering on two levels. Even the doctors who want to see group medicine implemented, who've seen some of the research, this course makes sense. AM last night, what do you say?
Yeah.
I'd love to see it, I just don't have time.
Yeah.
Right? So doctors are overworked anyway. So actually it helps that because they're not having to do one more thing. And I love that actually I can totally see why ego and the way that fundamentally to be at medical school, there is a certain type of personality, right? And I could say this because, this is not in a derogatory way, but a lot of people are super competitive. And, a lot of people have been validated for a lot of them get their self-worth. This used to be me. Mm-hmm. Get your self-worth from success or external validation. Now, how I've got rid of those things and why I feel happier and more content is something I've spoken about a lot recently, but that's a separate issue. The point is that I can totally see how doctors would not be the right person. And actually their expertise and knowledge can be downright harmful in this setting. So I think that's really, really powerful. You mentioned chronic pain. Why do you think this is so powerful for chronic pain? Because chronic pain is a big issue.
Yeah.
And the medical profession are not doing that well at dealing with it.
Number one, lonely people have higher pain scores. The science on chronic pain shows that it is, and this is a big word that I'm going to use here, it's a biopsychosocial disease. There are biological parts of it. There's, the physical body is dysfunctioning that's causing to it. There are psychological parts of it, right? And then there's also social parts. And so you can't solve a biopsychosocial problem with a biological input, a drug. It's not a match. Right? So lonely people have higher pain scores. The structure of actually now working to improve your physiology is what leads to that you wouldn't need the medication anymore. You've got to change your physiology. If your current physiology is causing ongoing chronic pain, you've got to change your physiology, and that's what the power of the group can do and the lifestyle medicine. And then, ultimately, to have it then be prescribed by a doctor gives the validation of the medical piece. So the doctors is important for them to prescribe it, but ultimately the action is happening with the group.
Okay, so first thing we get wrong, and we think the doctors need to run it.
Yeah.
So they don't.
Yeah.
Okay, great. What's that next hurdle that we fall at when trying to implement this?
I mean, most of the rest of it comes down to the boring, annoying details of rejigging a health system to do group medicine. So like one of those is, you know, we've had doctors that try to run this and they do it in person, right? Because getting in a group together in person is better than being online. But like if your clinic only has 4 parking spots and there's 20 people coming to the group, you can't run it. If there's no room where people can sit around together, you can't run it. You know, and so what we found, even though there might be more value in having the group meeting in person, with a completely virtual experience, like what are the what are the reasons why people love telemedicine? Why do people love telemedicine? One, it respects your time, right? You can come in from wherever you are, you can use your phone, you can chat to the doctor directly, you don't have to wait in the waiting room, you don't have to deal with your kids, you know, all those other things. It's very respectful of patients' time, that's why they like it. You know, so you get to come in from wherever you are. In America, there's a big conversation about the social determinants of health. How do you get to the office, right? Whose car?
The doctor's office.
How are you getting there? And if you have to go there every week, then, you know, that can be tricky. But here's the biggest thing. Health is happening outside of those sessions.
Yeah.
That's where health is actually happening. That's when you're making the decision of what you're going to eat tonight, or whether you're going to go for a walk after dinner, or what your movement for the day is going to be, or whether you're going to have the morning routine that you want. To be connected to the other people in the group at that moment is the critical moment. That's high touch care. You're able to touch with your people all the time. People know what this likes, Rangan, because most people have had the experience of being in a Facebook group, right? Where you see that there's like asynchronous communication. Not everyone's there at the same time.
Yeah.
Right. So I can put something in and say, hey, I really struggled with this today, but you know, I did this and I did that, put it in. And then you go off to work, and then you see a minute later, someone said, oh, I had that same experience, you know, or they said, this thing really helped me. Here's an episode of Dr. Chatterjee's podcast. You know, that kind of communication that's happening the whole time, and people are helping each other in the time that they're not in the office. And that's what we found to be the most valuable. And look, I think everyone would aspire that. Wouldn't it be great if every patient could have that kind of access to their doctor? There's just the resources don't add up. I'm an economist first and foremost. I'm a health economist, and so I come to this problem from a resource constraint, perspective. I'm not a doctor, but what I recognize is like, this is the path that people have to go to, and I spent the last 17 years trying to work out what is a way that can do it in a way that is using the right resources in the right way to create the right transformation. And ultimately, you can see in that process that allowing people who are inside, they already have an agreement of what they're doing together. They've set their SMART goals, they've set their collective intention. Another thing that we do at the beginning is help them to sort of define as a group what this group is, like what the name of it is, what it's going to be about for them. So they're like bought into it, and then they're just supporting each other throughout the process. And ideally, forever. I mean, in the book, I spoke about some of the original group visits. It starts off as a type 2 diabetes reversal group. But what do you do once everyone's reversed their diabetes? You know, in this case, it became a salsa dancing club and a gardening club. Salsa dancing in the winter because it was rainy in Massachusetts and they can't go outside, so they meet once a week for salsa dancing. And in the summer, it was a gardening club, both really healthy behaviors, when done as a group, even healthier. And some of these groups have gone on for 20 years.
Yeah. That Facebook group example, I think a lot of people will get that straight away. Yeah. I've got my own kind of Facebook group. I think it's called Dr. Chatterjee's 4-Pillar Tribe, and you know, I rarely go on it. But what's interesting, as you say, people are helping each other in there. It's just something I've created, right? But I'm not in there to answer questions. It's people in there who are helping. People post things like, oh, I'm really struggling with this with my health, you know, and then everyone's jumping on to help people. And it's really wonderful, because also for that person who's helping someone else, that is a real kind of boost to feel good into their arm, and that helps their health. And it's kind of who we are. You know, you mentioned men before and competition. I've been reading a lot recently on tribes, and there was one thing I was reading recently, and they were talking about running in tribes, and how running in a lot of modern hunter-gatherer tribes is not competitive. People aren't racing with each other. It's really interesting that running is a group thing. It's often to hunt. It's not about who's the fastest runner, which is quite interesting in itself. There's also, I was reading about some other tribes whereby if anyone's ego is getting a bit too elevated, or they think they're better than the people around them, there are certain practices that happen to sort of bring them back down to size. And more, I think, actually being competitive is not who we are.
Yeah.
It's who we become as a consequence of the way we're living life. And structure, and I think particularly with a lot of men, we end up thinking the way we are, being competitive, trying to do more, be more, is kind of, it's the male way to do things. We're realizing more and more it's leaving a lot of us incredibly isolated, lonely. We're drawn to what I call junk happiness habits, like booze, gambling, whatever it might be. And actually, that's why these men's groups, I think, are being so effective for so many people. Moving more doesn't necessarily mean that we are going to burn off more. I wonder if you could expand upon that, please.
Yeah, that's right. So even if you're more physically active, you're getting more exercise every day or getting more physical activity every day, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're burning more calories every day than someone who's more sedentary than you. And the surprising, that kind of goes against what we're taught and what we're told, both in nutrition classes, if you take them, or, whatever sort of basic biology you might have had, or for that matter, every website that talks about, exercise as a way to lose weight, or every glossy magazine, to sort of self-help idea about exercise and weight loss. And so it was a real surprise to us. And we came to this in a kind of a funny way. We were doing work with really physically active communities in northern Tanzania, and measuring energy expenditures. And even though they're more physically active than us, they don't burn any different. The energy expended per day is no different than you and me.
Yeah. I mean, that's incredible to hear. I remember, I think it was 2 or 3 years ago when I first came across one of your research papers. And for me, it really helped me understand what I see a lot in clinical practice. And I thought, it's so good to see some research there, because you're right. There's this narrative within the public health community, within the scientific community, but it's gone beyond that. Even within just common everyday conversation with people, it's an assumption that we all have made that moving more will lead to burning off more. And that was what's so striking about those early research papers I read of yours, which is it's literally turning that on its head. So what you're proposing, is pretty game-changing for a lot of people.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it was game-changing for us, I can tell you that. It was a total sea change in the way that I think about metabolism, and in the way that I think a lot of us on the sort of basic research side of things. I'm an evolutionary biologist, an anthropologist. I want us to understand human evolution and how our deep past, shaped the way our bodies work today. So I didn't come into this from a clinical kind of public health training. That's not my background. So it's been fun sort of seeing that work, be relevant and be in the discussion in public health. But we just wanted to understand how the body works, right, from a fundamental level, and to discover that sort of there's this really basic assumption that we're all making that had never really been tested very well. And then to go and test it, this relationship between activity and expenditure, to go out and finally do that work and go, wait a second, this is not actually what we all assumed coming in, but what we were trained in coming in. That was really exciting. So I think it is a game changer. I think you're right.
Yeah, I think many people will have heard that and go, what does he mean? That, if I move more, I know, like I can eat a Mars bar, I can see the calorie content, and therefore you have it in gyms that, therefore I can go and, run for 45 minutes now, or whatever the metric may be. So why don't we start at right at the very beginning, what is metabolism? How would you explain it to people? What are calories? And then from there, can you then take that next step and show us why moving more doesn't always lead to burning off more?
Yeah, that's a great place to start. So metabolism is just the sort of umbrella term for all the work that your cells do all day, right? So you've got 37 trillion cells, and they all are doing work all day to sort of bring nutrients in, break them down, make other molecules, get waste out. So this sort of housekeeping work that all of our cells are doing all day, all of that work requires energy. right? And so you could measure all the products that your cells make. And some people do that. They study metabolomics, it's called, and they're studying the proteins and enzymes that your cells are making. So you could measure the output, or you could do what a lot of us do, which is measure the energy expended for all that work. And it's basically two different ways of measuring the same process, which is all the work that those 37 trillion cells are doing. Now, most of that work we're only dimly aware of, or maybe even not aware of at all. So it's things like your liver digesting your food and doing all the work that your liver does. Your brain burns 300 kilocalories a day, right? We're dimly aware of that, if we're aware of that at all. Your immune system, reproductive system, all these things that your body's doing all day, most of it that you're not even conscious of, that's metabolism. Now, the parts of it that we're aware of are the exercise parts, right? When we get moving, we get sweaty, we get our heart rate up, we're aware of that part. And so we tend to sort of equate energy expenditure per day with the activity part that we can see or we can feel. But in fact, even for somebody who exercises regularly, that activity portion of your expenditure is well less than half of how many calories you're spending every day is spent on physical activity. Most of it's spent on all the other stuff that you don't even know. Okay, so that's metabolism. And as somebody who's interested in human evolution and in evolution generally, we want to know how all those calories are spent. And the activity part's cool, but we want to know about the energy spent on reproduction and on immune function and maintenance, all the tasks that the body's doing. That's why I get excited about metabolism, because you're sort of doing the forensic accounting of how the body is prioritizing the energy in and energy out. So as somebody who's interested in human evolution, the genus Homo, we're all Homo sapiens, right? The genus Homo has been hunting and gathering since its inception, since it evolved 2.5 million years ago. And so Homo sapiens, our species, is just the latest sort of twig off this large bough of the primate family tree, which is our bough, the genus Homo. And so to understand what humans are all about, and ecologically and evolutionarily, you need to understand what the body looks like and acts like and works like and metabolizes like in a hunting and gathering population. That's what you need, right? That's the ecologically real, sort of relevant lifestyle for us. But nobody had done it, right? So nobody had measured energy expenditures, total energy expenditures in a hunting and gathering population before. And so in 2009 and 10, Brian Wood and David Reichland, two of my good friends and collaborators, we went to work with one of the last hunting and gathering populations on the planet, which is this community called their name is the Hadza. So the Hadza community in northern Tanzania, they eat all their foods are all wild foods, plants and berries and tubers and wild game and honey, and they live in grass houses in northern, in the savannas in northern Tanzania. So they're a great, intact, wonderful, gracious, lovely folks living in northern Tanzania. And so we went there and we measured energy expenditures. And the reason we did all the work to go and get the funding and take time out of our lives to go and live with these folks for a long time, it was a long process, was to finally understand how many calories they spend every day, what humans spend every day when you're hunting and gathering. Okay, so Hadza men and women get about between 5 and 10 times more physical activity every day than men and women in the US or Europe. So they're incredibly physically active. If you're a step counter, right, the Hadza get about 13,000 to 19,000 steps a day.
Okay.
Right. Plus they're digging up tubers and they're chopping into trees to get honey out of because the bees there build their hives in the trees, and they're carrying babies on their back, and it's a lot of work. So we were certain that they would be spending tons more calories every day than we do in the West. That was the premise of the work, right?
Yeah,
that we were just going to go try to document that deficit that we seem to have in the West. And instead, what we found was that their total energy expenditures, total calories spent per day, is the same. Indistinguishable from folks in the US and Europe. And so, to get back to this, well, what is metabolism? The answer is it's all those things. It's the activity, it's the immune system. But what's happening is, rather than just sort of adding them up in a kind of simple way, obviously our bodies are able to kind of manage, right, and make the sort of economic decisions about how to spend those calories, so that as someone who lives in a population like the Hadza actually don't have a top line number of calories per day that's any different than you and me, even though they're obviously spending those calories very, very differently, lots on activity and less on other stuff.
Yeah, I mean, you call this the constrained energy expenditure model, I think.
Yeah.
And we have this idea that how we utilize energy is additive, don't we? So if I run for 1 hour, therefore I have, that whatever, I don't even know how many calories that would, in theory, you would burn off by doing that.
Yeah.
But we sort of feel we can then go and eat an equivalent amount because we've just earned it.
Yeah.
But it sort of works the other way as well, doesn't it? In terms of if we have overeaten, we then think that, well, I can go for a double run tomorrow or a extra long walk tomorrow to make up for it. But your research has shown that just simply is not the case, at least for most of us.
No, that's right. That's right. That's sort of the idea that you can run and earn your donuts, and it's a dangerous way to think, actually, because when you don't understand how clever the body is about sort of manipulating your metabolism, and you have this sort of simple view of how it works, then you can make sort of silly decisions like that, like, oh, well, I can have the box of donuts because tomorrow I'm going to go on a longer run. And actually, the body doesn't really work that way. The body is a long-term kind of time frame that your body's working under, sort of a couple weeks or even maybe a couple months, and it's paying attention to how physically active you are. And if you change that, if you start your exercise program and you're exercising more, you might lose a little bit of weight early on, but as your body adjusts to that new level of activity, your total energy expenditure will sort of moderate and end up not a whole lot different than before you started. And now you think that you're earning all these donuts, right? Because you've been really good and you're doing all your exercises. But in fact, those donuts are going to pile on because your exercise expenditure isn't doing what you think it does. It's not raising the total expenditure per day in the way that you think you would expect it to.
So how much does a typical Western man, a typical Western woman burn off each day compared to the Hadza population?
Yeah. So the biggest predictor of how many calories you're going to burn every day is how big you are, right? Because I say we have 37 trillion cells, but obviously if we're bigger, we have more. And if we're smaller, we have fewer. And so a typical, US or European or UK man burns about 3,000 kilocalories a day. And so that's about 11 megajoules if you prefer to do megajoules. And that has mostly to do with how big you are, how much you weigh, and particularly how much fat-free mass you have. Fat burns some calories. It's an active tissue. It makes hormones and that kind of stuff, but not as much. It's not nearly as active as all your other tissues. So fat is relatively quiet. So it's mostly your fat-free mass that determines how much you burn. Women in the US, UK, other parts of the industrialized world burn about 2,400 kilocalories a day. And the difference is that in the amount of energy burned is because women are a bit smaller and tend to be a bit smaller. And also women tend to carry a bit more body fat. So for a given, if you have a man and woman step on the scale and they have the exact same total body weight, the woman probably will have actually a little bit less fat-free mass because women tend to carry a bit more fat. Yeah. And therefore her expenditures we'd expect them to be a bit lower. Not because men and women are fundamentally different they are fundamentally different physiologically, but not because the expenditures are fundamentally different, just because the body compositions and sizes are a bit different on average. And then a Hadza man and women, they tend to be a short-statured group of folks. And so, they're a bit shorter on average than the typical US or UK man or woman. So they actually burn fewer calories. Women burn like 1,800 calories a day. Men are like 24, 25. They're all shifted down because they're smaller bodied. But once of course, we account for body size and composition whenever we do these analyses.
Yeah. I so want this point, one of the central points of your work to come through to people, because I think there's so many people who are, struggling to lose weight. They are trying, they're torturing themselves, depriving themselves, punishing themselves all the time. And they're possibly doing it with the wrong equation in mind, right? So it's doubly tragic. It's A, it's not working, and B, it's like it's not working because actually you're putting in all this hard work and effort, and actually that's potentially not the right equation to be using. So if we just sort of break it down again, so we have, let's say I'm the typical Western man on average will burn off 3,000 calories per day, right? So 3,000 calories is what they're going to use up. And you're saying a brain may use up 300 calories a day just to exist and do all the functions that we require off our brain, right? So there's 2,700 calories left on that sort of, on that very simple equation. So you're making the case, I think, that our immune system, our reproductive system, breathing, lungs, liver, spleen, basically all the organs in our body, just to do their job, they are chipping away at that. And so there's a huge amount of calories that are being burnt, nothing to do with exercise, just to be alive and engage with life on a daily basis. So then what happens? So for someone who then does go on a 1-hour run, and that is, or they think is going to be utilizing more calories, what happens in the body to keep that at 3,000? On one hand, you're taking from here, but you're sort of pulling back somewhere else. Is that the idea?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And a couple of things to be clear about. First of all, day to day, you might still fluctuate in your expenditures, right? So if you always run 10 miles on Tuesdays and you sit on the couch all your other days, then on Tuesdays, you'll burn more calories, right? Because your body can't adjust 24 hours. It doesn't adjust that quickly. It's more of sort of it's a lifestyle thing. Your body gets used to a lifestyle. So if you're the kind of person that's running, 20 miles a week versus the kind of person that's not, the person who's running 20 miles a week and your body's adjusted to that is spending, 20 miles. So it's about 100 kilocalories a mile, right? On average, it's a good rule of thumb. So 20 times 100 is 2,000 calories a week. So 2,000 calories a week is being spent on exercise for you. And that means that person is spending 2,000 calories less on all the other stuff. And so that's what's exciting for me as an evolutionary biologist, is figuring out what does the body prioritize, right? And so we know that some of the things that the body's reducing its expenditures on, right, the things it's taking away from, are some of the really good things that exercise does for you. So if you look at that person who's running 20 miles a week, they're going to have lower inflammation levels. But what is inflammation? Inflammation is actually energetically costly immune function that your body doesn't need to do, right? It's your innate immune function always on high alert when it doesn't need to be. And it's actually bad for you to have high background levels of inflammation. Stress. If we look at people who are exercising versus those who don't, the people who exercise have a lower and shorter surge of things like epinephrine and cortisol in response to stress, right? And so they're spending fewer calories on that stress response. And if you are over the course of the day, you're constantly being on high alert because, right, that's not good for you either. So actually the suppression of that stress response is probably really good for you. People who exercise a lot will have healthy, I want to stress this, healthy, but lower testosterone, estrogen, and progesterone levels on average, a bit lower. And that's going to help you save energy too. So your body's and that's probably not the only thing that your body's doing. You might be making other sort of subtle adjustments about how do you sit rather than stand, that kind of thing. So your body's kind of making all these adjustments, and that's how you make the numbers work. That the people don't spend the 20 miler a week and the sedentary person don't have different expenditures overall, because the 20 miler a week is spending less on these other things.
Yeah, I love it. It just shows just how clever and highly tuned our bodies are. It's really humbling, actually, to think we're smarter than our bodies. We'll eat a bit more here, run a bit more of it. Our body's like, oh, hold on a minute. We're far cleverer than that. And I love the fact that it seems as though we can prioritize different functions depending on what's going on. So, in Burn, you write about not just the Hadza, you write about another another population that begins with T. I don't know how you pronounce it.
Oh, the Chimani. Yeah.
How do you pronounce it?
Chimani.
The Chimani.
Yeah.
And I found it fascinating that that they 70% of them have an active parasite infection in their guts.
Yeah.
And therefore, I think you're saying that actually, because there's that background level of infection and therefore inflammation, that the body is potentially diverting more energy towards the immune system and less to other parts of the body?
Yeah, so the Chimani show this. There's another group where we've showed this even, since the book has come out, actually. This stuff is moving so fast, it's really fun. But there's a group called the Shuar, which is they're also an Amazonian. So the Chimani live in Bolivia. Okay. The Shuar live in Ecuador. And they're both sort of Amazonian rainforest populations. And the Shuar, my postdoc at the time, Sam Erlocker, did this great study looking at children. And so we had Shuar children who are very remote. They do a lot of hunting and gathering. They do a little bit of farming, but a subsistence, sort of simple, traditional lifestyle. And they have a high pathogen burden too. As you can imagine, if you live without, any sort of modern medicines, barefoot mostly in really remote rainforest environments, you get a lot of parasites, you get a lot of bacteria. So your immune system's always active. And those kids, they have elevated basal metabolic rates, just like we see with the Chimani. But what's cool is with the Shuar population, we've got children, so we can actually measure their growth while they're, because they're kids. And Sam's able to show very nicely, if you look at the amount of immune activation, short-term immune function was something we measure with CRP, C-reactive protein, which is your body's first flush of immune response to a really, an acute stress. Kids who have that, they grow less in the subsequent couple of weeks. Kids who have these sort of long-term, markers, there's different immune function markers that we can use to say, oh, that's a long-term infection, or that's a short-term response. The long-term responses are correlated nicely with kids' long-term growth. So the kids that are constantly getting the most immune hit, right, are backing off of they're backing off their growth. And sure enough, when you measure expenditures, right, total energy expenditures, their total energy expenditures are the same as kids in the US or Europe, right? So these kids are in other words, these kids are all playing with the same energy budget. You all get the same number of calories, and you can spend it however you like. And if you spend it on immune function, you've got less to spend on growth. It has to be that way, right? And sure enough, that's what we see. So that prioritization is just super interesting to watch happen.
Yeah, it's truly fascinating. And I mean, a little while ago, you mentioned that the Hadza tend to be shorter stature than let's say the typical Western population. Is some of this playing in there as well because of their lifestyles? Do you feel that maybe we have, I don't know, how would you sort of, how would you put that together potentially?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, we don't know. So height is a great example of a trait that has both a really strong genetic component, right? Tall parents tend to have tall kids, and a really strong environmental component, right? So it's not nature or nurture, or nature versus nurture. It's those things acting together. And so a population like the Hadza, who tend to be short statured, they probably have a lot of gene variants that would, even if they grew up here in the West, they probably would end up a bit shorter on average. So it's not just the environment, but I bet it's playing into it. And, probably the best example of this is something called the immigrant effect, which was documented pretty well in the mid 1900s, which is that when you see, people who grow up, their parents grow up in a developing country, and without access to great medicines, and without maybe access to great food, and with a lot of physical stress in their lives, their parents grow up and they're relatively short. They move to a country that has better medicine, better nutrition, less work stress for the kids, and the kids are all, a few centimeters taller than the parents on average, the immigrant effect. And so that's been well documented in people from lots of different parts of the world. You come from an energy stressed environment, you move it into an energy rich environment, and your kids get taller, right? Because your kids are spending less energy than you were as a kid on all these other tasks.
The idea of a budget, I think, is brilliant. We've all got the same budget. So it's just, where is your body going to allocate the resources? It's like, if you have a set amount of income, do you want to spend that on a small house and a fancy car, or do you want it on a, do you want it on a big house and a not so nice car, or whatever? It's a beautiful way of thinking about the body, I think.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And we talk, in evolutionary biology, we are talking about energy budgets all the time. That's kind of how we think about it, right? And it's been fun too, because for some reason, in evolutionary biology, people got really comfortable talking about energy budgets in terms of like reproduction versus growth, or maintenance, like immune function versus growth, and talking about trade-offs like that. And then somehow, even in evolutionary biology, activity was sort of this extra thing that could always get added on top, and you could always just fund that somehow separately. And I don't know how that thinking ever really took hold. But basically, my work is saying, no, activity is just another, physical activity is just another activity that your body has to do that is just part of the mix. It's just part of the budget, and you kind of, to expand or contract the budget much is hard. You might push a little bit, you might get a little, but not as much as you think you're getting, because your body wants to kind of maintain the same budget no matter what.
Yeah. No, I think it's important that we're super clear. You're saying that exercising more, certainly in the long term, does not lead to us burning off more calories, but you're not saying we shouldn't exercise. In fact, you're saying quite the contrary, that it's incredibly important. And I love this bit in the book, which I'm just going to read if you don't mind.
Sure.
Those ancient adaptations have consequences for us today. Our bodies are built to move. In our modern, industrialized world, free of the daily demands of foraging for our foods, we need to exercise for our bodies to function properly. It's a legacy of our hunter-gatherer past. Why is it so important that we move our bodies?
Yeah, so this is another, I think, benefit of taking an evolutionary perspective. And that is to understand that our bodies and our behaviors co-evolve. Okay, so a really nice example of this is in fish, right? You ever heard the example that people talk about sharks? If sharks don't keep swimming, right, they drown. A shark can drown. Why? Well, because ancient fish, all ancestral fish, when they evolved gills, evolved the ability to pump. They have muscles on the side of their gills that allow them to pump the water past their gills. So they can. Most fish can just hang out still and just slowly pump the water past their gills, and they're fine because they can keep on getting fresh water, oxygenated water through their gills. Sharks and tuna and a couple of other sort of really active species like that, really physically active species, they're swimming so much that evolution actually favored reducing and then eventually kind of eliminating, because why spend on energy if you don't need to, on that musculature, because they're moving all the time anyway. They could just kind of open their mouths and the water just kind of streams past their gills. And so now if you take that same fish and you don't let it move, it dies, right? So it's the behavior, the swimming all the time, and the anatomy, which is this gullet pumping mechanism, or gill pumping mechanism, co-evolving. And it's a nice example that we can kind of all get a hold of. But it happens all over the place. This is how evolution always works: is behaviors and anatomies co-evolve. In humans, right? Again, we've been hunting and gathering for 2.5 million years. And what does that do? Well, if you start hunting and if you start gathering in savanna landscapes where the food is scarce, you need to walk and just move a lot more to get your food. You have to, right? If food is farther apart to find. Animals will run free from you. They don't want to get caught. And so hunting and gathering just requires a ton of physical activity, and your body, that's the behavior. And then the body adapts to that and gets used to that. And your body, you are born into the world with a body that expects to move, just like those, a shark is born into the world with a gills that expect to be pushed through the water. And now if we don't do that, if we rob ourselves of that constant activity that we normally get, bad things happen, right? Our physiology kind of expects that. And just like the shark that stops swimming, bad things happen when we stop exercising, because every aspect is actually hard to find. I would challenge anybody to find a piece of your body that isn't contingent on that activity signal for normal function. It kind of gets everywhere.
Yeah. And I guess that then speaks to how do we how do we talk about physical activity to the population? How do I, as a medical doctor, talk about it with my patients? Because a lot of the time it is done around fat loss, weight loss. And I think there's two sides to that coin a little bit. I've seen a few of your Twitter debates over the last few months on this. Sure. And, it's quite a controversial topic as to, first of all, is exercise needed for weight loss? And therefore, depending on what your view is on that, how do we then articulate that message? So what are your sort of, having engaged in this for a few months and maybe several years, what is your current view on that?
Yeah, I think that we need to be honest with people. I think that that's the best public health message, is one that's going to be accurate to the science. And I think the science says that exercise by itself is not a very good weight loss tool. And even exercise along with diet changes, exercise doesn't add a whole lot to the weight loss piece of it.
Is that in the long term? But because you're saying for a week or 2 or 3 weeks,
you'll see
you will get a benefit. You mean beyond that?
Yeah, long term. So I mean, there's great data on this that comes from all sorts of labs that aren't mine. So this isn't me speaking necessarily. This is if you look at the long-term effects of exercise interventions, exercise alone, the long-term expectation for weight loss is about 2 kilograms, right? So that's great. If you're looking to lose 2 kilograms, that's perfect. But most people who are overweight or obese are looking to lose much more. And if you look at how much they're working, they sort of should lose much more, right? The tons of calories they're burning, but it doesn't work that way because the body adjusts. Okay, so I think sometimes my work gets sort of, I think, mischaracterized as saying that exercise isn't important. I think that's not what I've ever said. Yeah, exercise is super important. Now, do we exercise for weight loss? I would say this: we don't exercise for weight loss, but you might exercise during weight loss for all the other benefits you get. But I think that if we want to move the number on the bathroom scale, and if we want to get fat loss to happen, then that has to be a diet approach, right? And when you go to look, I'm not a clinician, so I would defer to people who are in clinical practice like yourself. But somebody comes in and has a serious weight problem, and we think that we look at their blood profiles, we look at their blood pressure, we look at the direction things are going, and we say, look, this person needs to lose weight to get to a better place in terms of their health. There are a bunch of things you could prescribe, but wouldn't you make sure that you emphasize the thing that has the biggest effect, which should be that's diet, right? And so what I think is wrong, and that you see this in public health messaging all the time, is this equivalence of exercise and diet. That's what bothers me, because that is not what the science says, right? So you say, well, you have to diet and exercise. And so if we say it like that, it sounds like maybe I'll just do one or the other and I could pick. Or it sounds like maybe exercise and diet have the same effect because one's energy in and one's energy out, and I could just decide to focus on one or the other. And that really isn't what the science says. The science says the diet is going to do all the heavy lifting, and exercise to add on to that is fantastic and can do all kinds of good things. But it's the diet piece that's actually going to change the number on the scale.
If you enjoyed that conversation, I think you are really going to enjoy this one on the power of food to transform your health.
As we sit down every day to make a decision about what we eat, or we go to the store to buy some food, we need to realize whatever we put into our body is either going to take our health down or build our health back up.